Welcome to Mind Peace, where we slow down time, wander through the wonders of the universe, and gently explore the quiet beauty of your body and mind. Tonight, we're taking a slow, thoughtful walk through something astonishing. Your nervous system, a vast, whispering web of thought and memory, emotion and reaction, movement and stillness, all humming silently beneath your skin. You barely notice it, but it never stops noticing you. This isn't a lesson, and it's not a lecture. It's a soft unraveling, a moment of stillness in your day, something to fall asleep to dream through, or just breathe with. So wherever you are, in bed, on a quiet walk, curled up on the sofa, let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes rest. Take a long, slow breath, because we're about to listen to the most silent conversation your body is always having, one you've never really heard. The quiet nervous system. We'll listen closely to the quiet conversation happening inside you every moment of your life. Your nervous system. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. But without it, there would be no movement, no memory, no feeling, no thought. And, as always, a gentle reminder. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. Somewhere inside you right now, a signal is zipping along a delicate thread of nerve fiber. Maybe a quiet update about the temperature of your toes, or a whispered instruction to adjust your posture ever so slightly. And the most remarkable part, you're not even aware it's happening. The nervous system is the ultimate behind-the-scenes operator. It's your body's command center, messenger service, and crisis response team all rolled into one. And it manifesto do all of that without demanding a single moment of your conscious attention. Unlike your heart, which beats rhythmically and insistently, or your lungs, which rise and fall in a visible rhythm, the nervous system is mostly invisible. It doesn't flex, rumble, or sigh. It thinks in silence. At its core, the nervous system is divided into two big departments: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord, the main headquarters where all the major decisions are made. Think of it as mission control, humming quietly in the dark, issuing orders, evaluating reports, and processing everything from memories to muscle movements. The peripheral nervous system, meanwhile, is the vast communication network that branches out from the spinal cord and brainstem, reaching into every fingertip, organ, and toe. If the central nervous system is the CEO, the peripheral system is the team of messengers, sensors, and field agents, keeping the operation running smoothly out in the wild. It delivers information in both directions from the outside world in and from the brain back out to the body. These two systems work together at astonishing speed. When you touch something hot, nerves in your skin send that urgent ouch signal to your spinal cord in a fraction of a second, and the command to yank your hand back is already en route before you even fully register what happened. That's not magic. That's fast, efficient biology. But the nervous system isn't just about speed. It also handles slower, more subtle forms of communication. Some signals aren't racing toward action, but drifting through circuits that evaluate, weigh, and integrate. Think of the difference between reflexively jumping away from a spider and slowly realizing that a friend's voice sounds a little sad tonight. Both responses come from the same system. Butone is a lightning bolt, and the other is a cloud gradually forming in your mental sky. And here's where it gets even more impressive. Unlike many other systems in the body, the nervous system doesn't have just one job. The circulatory system pumps blood. The digestive system processes food. But the nervous system, it thinks, feels, remembers, regulates, predicts, interprets, moves, reacts, adapts, and dreams. It is the stage, the script, and the actor all at once. Signals travel through it using a mix of electrical impulses and chemical messengers like a telegraph line that sometimes switches to smoke signals, then back again. This hybrid mode of communication is why you can have both immediate reactions and long-lasting emotional effects. A sharp noise might make you jump, but a few carefully chosen words can stay with you for years. Same system, different tools. Another fascinating feature is how the nervous system balances voluntary and involuntary actions. You choose to lift your arm, but you don't choose to sweat when you're nervous. You can hold your breath, but you can't stop your pupils from adjusting to light. The nervous system lives in this grey area between control and surrender. Some parts obey your will. Others go on with or without your permission, which is honestly kind of nice. It would be exhausting to consciously regulate your heart rate every time you climbed a flight of stairs. The central nervous system itself is sheltered with a kind of reverence. The brain is tucked away inside a bony skull, wrapped in 3 layers of protective membrane and bathed in cerebral spinal fluid, a clear cushioning liquid that acts as both a shock absorber and a nutrient delivery system. The spinal cord is similarly guarded, running through the vertebrae like a precious cable in a steel conduit. Nature seems to know how critical these structures are and takes no chances with their safety. Meanwhile, the peripheral nerves stretch outward like vines from a hidden root system, weaving into muscles, skin, and organs with delicate precision. Some of them are incredibly long. The sciatic nerve, for example, runs from the lower spine all the way down to your foot. That's a single nerve, several feet long, quietly fing messages up and down your leg all day long without a fuss. It's easy to forget just how much is happening in every moment. Right now, your body is receiving sensory data from the environment. Light levels, air temperature, the pressure of the mattress or chair beneath you. Your nervous system is filtering that information, deciding what to prioritize and what to ignore. If it didn't, you'd be overwhelmed by raw input. You wouldn't be able to focus on these words or anything else. It's also in charge of keeping tabs on your internal world. Blood pressure, glucose levels, oxygen saturation. These aren't just measured, they're responded to. When something shifts, the nervous system nudges other systems into action. Whether it's speeding up your heartbeat, signaling hunger, or coaxing you into a yawn. It's not just a communicator, it's a coordinator. One of its most subtle tricks is how it maintains homeostasis. That balanced just right internal state that your body constantly aims for. Not too hot, not too cold, not too acidic, not too basic. Enough oxygen, not too much carbon dioxide. It's like trying to balance a stack of pebbles on a trampoline during a breeze. And yet, your nervous system does it effortlessly all the time. The whole structure is a marvel of evolution, not cobbled together randomly, but refined over millions of years. Even the simplest creatures have some version of a nervous system, because without it, there's no awareness, no interaction, no ability to survive. In fact, it's hard to imagine a living thing being alive at all without some way to detect, respond, and adapt. In that sense, the nervous system is not just a system, it's the very essence of being. And perhaps most wonderfully, all of this complexity is not noisy. It doesn't buzz or blink. It's quiet, invisibly busy, incredibly modest, considering the scale of its responsibilities. If it had a personality, it might be that friend who always shows up early, gets everything done, never asks for credit, and somehow remembers your coffee order from 4 years ago. So, the next time you feel your fingers twitch, your heart race, or a memory bubble up from somewhere deep, just know that's your nervous system gently at work, not making a sound, just running the show quietly. If you had to nominate one cell in your body for most likely to overthink everything, it would almost certainly be the neuron. These are not the bold, broy types like muscle cells or the endlessly regenerating skin cells. Neurons are thinkers, listeners, meticulous communicators, and while they might seem unassuming under a microscope, they are the powerhouses of thought, sensation, memory, and movement, all while maintaining a distinct air of introverted mystery. Let's begin with the basics. A neuron is a type of cell specially designed to transmit information. But unlike most cells which prefer a more solitary lifestyle, neurons are inherently social. Their whole identity is built around connection. Not one or two, but often thousands. Some neurons form more than 10,000 synapses with their neighbors, like quiet intellectuals at the center of Avery's sophisticated gossip network. Despite their social tendencies, neurons tend to keep to themselves, structurally. Each one has a distinctive shape, usually with a cell body, also called the soma, a single long projection, called an axon, and a forest of branching extensions known as dendrites. If you picture a tree turned on its side, you wouldn't be far off. The dendrites are like leafy branches receiving signals. The soma is the sturdy trunk handling the core operations, and the axon is the long root stretching outward, delivering information far and wide. The dendrites are where a neuron listens. They're covered in tiny receptors that receive chemical messages from neighboring cells. These messages arrive in the form of neurotransmitters, molecules like dopamine, serotonin, and glutamate, which either encourage the neuron to fire its own message or tell it to stay quiet. A single neuron might be receiving messages from thousands of other cells, all whispering at once, and its job is to decide whether the overall message is loud enough to warrant a reply. That reply comes in the form of an electrical impulse called an action potential. This is where things get exciting in a very microscopic way. If the cell receives enough stimulation, it hits a certain threshold and generates a rapid electrical signal that travels down the axon like a wave. It's a bit like someone flipping a row of dominoes, but instead of tumbling plastic, it's ions rushing across the neuron's membrane, reversing polarity as they go. It's fast, it's precise, and it happens millions of times a day without you ever noticing. Now, the axon isn't just a passive wire. In many neurons, it's wrapped in a special insulating layer called myelin. Myelin is made by gal cells, the quiet custodians of the nervous system, and it helps the electrical signal move faster and more efficiently. In fact, a well-myelinated axon can transmit signals over 100 times faster than an unmyelinated one. It's a bit like the difference between a dirt path and a high-speed train line. The signal still gets there either way, but one arrives fashionably, late with dirt on its shoes, while the other glides in on schedule and polished rails. At the very end of the axon, things branch out again. This is the axon terminal, a cluster of tiny endings that get remarkably close to the dendrites of other neurons, but not quite close enough to touch. Between them lies the synapse, that small but crucial gap across which neurotransmitters leap like microscopic messengers carrying gossip between close-knit neighbors. The whole process is exquisitely timed and regulated, and a single neuron can repeat it thousands of times per second. Interestingly, neurons come in many shapes and sizes depending on where they live and what they do. Some are tiny, communicating over mere millim in your brain. Others are long and winding. The motor neurons in your spinal cord, for instance, can stretch all the way to your toes. That's like a single cell running the length of a greyhound. It's a remarkable feat of cellular endurance, and a testament to just how far these quiet little introverts are willing to go to keep you moving. Different types of neurons have different jobs. Sensory neurons pick up information from the environment, like light, sound, temperature, or pressure, and relay it to the brain for interpretation. Motor neurons carry instructions from the brain out to the muscles, making sure your limbs respond to your intentions. Even if your intentions include fumbling around for your alarm clock, then there are interneurons, the middlemen, found mostly in the brain and spinal cord. They form complex networks that analyze, integrate, and decide what to do with all that incoming information. What's fascinating is how specialized and irreplaceable neurons are. Unlike many other cells in your body, neurons don't divide and replenish themselves regularly. Once you have them, that's mostly it. You're born with about 80 to 100 billion neurons, and while that number may slowly decline with age or injury, it's enough to carry you through an entire lifetime of thoughts, dreams, reflexes, and awkward social encounters. That said, neurons are not entirely without flexibility. They're capable of changing the strength of their connections, adjusting how they respond to certain signals, and even forging new pathways if you learn something new or form a memory. This adaptability is part of what makes the brain so powerful. It isn't just a static machine. It's a living, rewiring, ever-evolving network of possibilities. In a way, neurons are like those rare people who are quiet in crowds, but say just the right thing at just the right time. They don't demand attention, but without them, everything would fall apart. They're thoughtful, measured, deliberate, sending signals across your body with perfect timing and precision, even as you sleep or daydream, or wonder what you were about to say before you got distracted by a passing thought. These little cells have been with you from the very beginning. They formed into patterns while you were still floating in the amniotic quiet of the womb. They practiced firing even before you were born and after birth. They exploded into activity, forming connections at a rate of nearly 1 million per second in the earliest months of life. That early neural bloom laid the groundwork for walking, talking, imagining, and learning. And even now, your neurons are still adjusting, refining, reshaping their networks in response to your experiences. Despite their complexity, neurons are remarkably energy efficient. They use precise bursts of energy only when needed, and their resting state, the calm between firings, is carefully maintained by a balance of charged particles inside and outside the cell. The sodium-potassium pump, for example, works like a gatekeeper, maintaining the delicate voltage across the membrane until it's time for action. It's quiet maintenance, always working behind the scenes. Neurons are also chemically diverse. They don't all use the same neurotransmitters, and some even use multiple ones depending on the context. Dopamine, for example, plays a role in reward and motivation, while GABA-gamma-mapyric acid tends to have a calming inhibitory effect. Glutamate, on the other hand, is an excitatory superstar crucial for memory and learning. The chemical language of neurons is nuanced, layered, and far more sophisticated than we once imagined. Despite all this sophistication, neurons are still vulnerable. They can be damaged by trauma, deprived of oxygen during a stroke, or affected by diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. But even in these challenges, the nervous system often finds ways to adapt. Neighboring neurons might strengthen their connections. New paths might be forged, and researchers around the world are working every day to understand how to help these cells heal or regenerate. For all their brilliance, neurons remain curiously humble. They don't reproduce headlines like heart transplants or bionic limbs, but they quietly power everything that makes you you. Your thoughts, your voice, your hopes, and your sense of time. They are the invisible network that lets you imagine, remember, love, and decide what kind of pizza you want. So next time you pause mid-thought or feel an idea spark into life, it's worth appreciating that somewhere deep in your brain, a neuron, or maybe a small chorus of them just fired in elegant harmony. No grand performance, no loud announcement, just a gentle electric whisper from one introverted cell to the next. If you've ever been jolted awake by a brilliant idea or reflexively pulled your hand back from something hot, congratulations. You've just experienced the silent spark of an action potential. No noise, no flash, just a whisper of electricity rushing down a microscopic cable. It's one of biology's most astonishing tricks. A tiny zap inside a single cell that somehow helps you read, dance, remember birthdays, and occasionally forget why you walked into the kitchen. At the heart of this marvel is the humble neuron. And at the heart of the neuron's powers is its ability to generate an electrical impulse, not with batteries or wires, but with a delicate dance of ions. Electrically charged particles, like sodium and potassium, that flow in and out of the cell at just the right moments. It's not unlike the ebb and flow of a tide, except that this tide moves in milliseconds and carries your every thought with it. To understand how neurons fire, we need to peek inside their membranes, the thin, flexible boundaries that separate the inside of the cell from the outside world. These membranes aren't just barriers, they're incredibly selective gates equipped with tiny protein channels and pumps that carefully control what moves in and out. When a neuron is at rest, not actively firing, it's in a state called the resting potential. Imagine it as a calm beach before the first wave rolls in. During this state, the inside of the neuron is slightly more negative than the outside. This difference in charge, known as the membrane potential, is usually about 70 millivolts. Not much in absolute terms, but in the cellular world, that's like holding a tightly wound spring, ready to uncoil at the slightest provocation. This charge difference is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump, a protein that tirelessly exchanges ions across the membrane. For every 3 sodium ions it pushes out, it brings in 2 potassium ions. This creates a high concentration of sodium outside the cell and a higher concentration of potassium inside. It's a bit like storing firewood just outside the door while keeping a few logs handy inside, ready for quick use but not enough to start a bonfire. Then comes the stimulus, a small change in the environment, maybe a message from another neuron or a touch on the skin. If the stimulus is strong enough, it nudges the membrane potential closer to what's called the threshold. This threshold is usually around 55 in pounds. If the neuron reaches this magic number, the gates fly open, and when those gates open, everything changes in a flash. Voltage-gated sodium channels, specialized protein pores in the membrane, snap open, and sodium ions rush into the cell. It's a flood. The inside of the neuron, once negatively charged, quickly becomes more positive. This rapid change in electrical charge is the action potential. The action potential doesn't just sit there, though. It moves. Like a spark racing along a fuse, the depolarization at one segment of the axon causes the next segment's sodium channels to open, and then the next, and the next. It's a self-propagating wave, not unlike a stadium doing the wave, but with far more precise choreography and fewer nachos. As the action potential travels down the axon, the original segment begins to reset. Sodium channels close and potassium channels open, allowing potassium to flow out of the cell. This repolarizes the membrane, returning it to a more negative state. Eventually, everything settles back into the resting potential. It's a little like cleaning up after a party. The excitement is over, and now it's time to get the chairs back in place and refill the snack bowls. There's also a brief period during which that part of the neuron can't fire again, called their refractory period. It ensures that the action potential only moves in one direction and prevents the neuron from firing too rapidly. Think of it as a mandatory coffee break between tasks. Even neurons need a moment to catch their breath. Now, if the neuron happens to be wrapped in myelin, that insulating layer provided by Gal cells, the signal jumps between gaps in the myelin called nodes of Ranvier. This is known as saltatory conduction, and it dramatically speeds up signal transmission. Instead of crawling down the axon inch by inch, the signal leaps from node to node like a frog hopping across lily pads. It's energy efficient and lightning fast. Interestingly, the action potential itself doesn't change in size. It's all or nothing. If the threshold is reached, the neuron fires at full strength. If not, it doesn't fire at all. There's no in-between, no partial effort. It's a yes or no decision, a binary switch that keeps everything clear and consistent. What varies is how frequently a neuron fires, not how strongly. A loud sound or a painful stimulus might cause a rapid burst of action potentials, while a gentle breeze might produce only the occasional pulse. This system of electrical signals allows for extraordinary precision. A single neuron might fire only a few times per second, while others can manage hundreds of firings in the same span. These patterns, the rhythm and frequency of zaps, are what the brain uses to encode different types of information. It's not just about whether a neuron fires, but how often and when, like a Morse code built out of electricity and silence. And this entire process happens incredibly fast. An action potential can be over in just a few milliseconds. And in that time, it can travel several feet along an axon. It's fast enough to let you blink before a bug hits your face or pull your hand away from a hot stove before your brain fully registers the pain. The phrase split-second decision is not just poetic. Your neurons are literally operating in fractions of seconds all the time. While all this might sound mechanical, the implications are profoundly human. These tiny sparks, individual action potentials happening millions of times per minute make up the foundation of thought, sensation, movement, memory, and emotion. Whether you're writing poetry, learning to juggle, or just deciding which socks to wear, it's all action potentials, humming quietly along your neural highways. What's more, this electrochemical system is incredibly adaptable. Neurons can become more or less sensitive to stimulation over time, depending on use. They can change how many receptors they have, adjust their firing threshold, or even remodel their connections entirely. Your thoughts are not just passengers riding on fixed train tracks. They help lay the tracks as they go, subtly rewiring the brain through experience and repetition. On a molecular level, none of this is glamorous. It's ions moving across membranes, proteins flipping open and shut, gradients balancing like chemical seesaws. But collectively, it gives rise to everything that makes us who we are. The big abstract ideas like imagination, memory, or fear all begin with something as humble as a sodium channel opening at the right moment. And while the term electrical signal might evoke something noisy or jarring, in the nervous system, these sparks are silent. There's no crackling sound or bright flash, no visible arc. It's a quiet current, softer than a whisper, moving invisibly through tissue, guiding the world inside your head and body. Every time you take a breath, feel a tickle, recall a name, or reach for a cup of tea, you're witnessing the result of countless action potentials, each one a perfect example of nature's quiet engineering. It's a system that values speed, yes, but also grace, efficiency, and reliability. So, while your heart may beat and your lungs may sigh, the real choreography of your life is happening in the silence between sparks, where thought begins and action waits just a millisecond away. Imagine a world where no one ever spoke directly, where messages were passed across small gaps by carefully trained messengers carrying coded packages. Welcome to the synapse, the tiny but mighty gap between neurons where information isn't shouted across but elegantly relayed in chemical whispers. This microscopic space, typically less than 1/10,000th of a millimeter wide, is the meeting point between the end of one neuron and the beginning of another, but they don't actually touch. Instead, like polite conversationalists maintaining a respectful, personal bubble, neurons pass their messages across this gap using chemicals known as neurotransmitters. Let's set the scene. A neuron has just fired an action potential, that brief but powerful electrical impulse that races down its axon. At the very end of that axon, things branch out into tiny structures called axon terminals. These terminals are loaded with special packages called synaptic vesicles, tiny bubbles filled with neurotransmitters, each one like a miniature message in a bottle. When the electrical signal arrives at the terminal, it doesn't jump the gap directly. Electricity doesn't make that kind of leap. Instead, it triggers a chemical chain reaction. The action potential causes calcium channels to open, allowing calcium ions to flood into the terminal. This influx is the cue for those synaptic vesicles to move toward the membrane, fuse with it, and release their neurotransmitter contents into the synaptic CLFT, the space between neurons. And just like that, the message has transformed from electrical to chemical. Now the neurotransmitters drift across the synaptic CLFT, which may be incredibly narrow but is filled with potential. On the receiving side, the dendrite of the next neuron, there are specialized proteins called receptors. Each receptor is designed to bind to a specific type of neurotransmitter, a bit like a lock that only fits one key. When the neurotransmitter finds its matching receptor, it binds to it and causes a change in the receiving neuron. This might trigger an action potential of its own, or it might inhibit one from forming. It all depends on the kind of neurotransmitter and the receptor it binds to. Some neurotransmitters are excitatory, encouraging the next neuron to fire. Glutamate is a classic example. It's the go-getter of the neurotransmitter world, playing a major role in learning and memory. Others are inhibitory, dampening the chance of firing. GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the brain's gentle SH, helping to calm over active circuits and prevent neural chaos. It's the chemical equivalent of someone placing a hand on your shoulder and gently saying, maybe let's not panic just yet. Then there are the modulators, neurotransmitters, that don't directly trigger or prevent firing, but influence how responsive neurons are to other signals. Dopamine, for instance, helps shape motivation, reward, and movement. Serotonin plays a role in mood, appetite, and sleep. Norepinephrine is involved in alertness and arousal. These chemicals don't yell instructions. They tweak the volume knob, adjusting how loudly other signals are heard. It's important to note that the same neurotransmitter can have different effects depending on where it lands. Dopamine in one part of the brain might be about pleasure and anticipation. In another, it's about motor control. Serotonin, depending on the receptor it binds to, might either excite or inhibit a neuron. Context is everything. Once the neurotransmitter has done its job, it doesn't just hang around. The synapse is a place of quick exchanges, not lingering conversations. There are several ways the signal is cleared. Sometimes the neurotransmitter is broken down by enzymes, molecular scissors, that cut it into inactive pieces. Other times it's taken back into the original neuron through a process called reuptake. Think of it like recycling the message for future use. Some drugs, like certain antidepressants, work by blocking this reuptake, allowing serotonin to stick around a bit longer and have a more prolonged effect. The efficiency of this whole system is mind-boggling. A single neuron can form thousands of synapses, and across the human brain, there are estimated to be over 100 trillion synapses. That's more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way. And yet, each one is exquisitely precise. Messages are delivered, interpreted, and erased in fractions of a second, creating the seamless experience of thought, sensation, and movement that we take entirely for granted. Not all synapses are the same either. While chemical synapses are the most common, using neurotransmitters to send signals, there are also electrical synapses. These are direct connections between neurons using gap junctions that allow ions to flow freely between cells. They're faster, but less flexible. Chemical synapses, though slightly slower, offer more nuance and control, which is likely why evolution favored them for complex tasks like emotion, memory, and decision M. The balance of neurotransmitters' asynapses is delicate and constantly changing. Learning, for example, involves strengthening some synaptic connections while weakening others. This process, known as synaptic plasticity, is what allows your brain to adapt, grow, and recover from injury. It's also why practicing something, whether it's playing piano or speaking French, literally reshapes your brain. The synapses involved become more efficient, more responsive, more tightly connected. Sometimes this balance is disrupted. Too little dopamine can lead to Parkinson's disease, a condition marked by tremors and slowed movement. Too much dopamine, activity in certain pathways, is associated with schizophrenia. A deficiency in serotonin has been linked to depression, while disruptions in GABA signaling can lead to anxiety or seizures. In these cases, medications may be used to help restore balance, often by influencing neurotransmitter production, breakdown, or reuptake. And yes, this is also how many recreational drugs work. Substances like caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, and more potent agents like cocaine and MDMA all hijack the synaptic process in various ways. They may flood the synapse with dopamine, block reuptake of serotonin, or mimic natural neurotransmitters to produce euphoric or stimulating effects. It's a powerful system, and even tiny chemical tweaks can have enormous effects on mood, behavior, and perception. All of this happens without a sound. There's no crackling static, no flashing light, no fanfare, just molecules drifting across microscopic spaces, locking onto their targets and triggering changes that ripple across networks of cells. It's chemical, poetry written in an alphabet of amino acids and carried by invisible waves. If you zoomed out far enough, those trillions of synaptic conversations form the basis for your personality, your habits, your memories, and your quirks. That moment of laughter, The sudden memory of a childhood room, the decision to have pancakes instead of toast, all of it rooted in neurotransmitters crossing tiny gaps and binding to waiting receptors. It's easy to think of the brain as a computer full of cold logic and blinking circuits. But synapses tell a different story. They're not mechanical. They're organic, fluid, and dynamic. They can strengthen, weaken, grow, and vanish entirely. They can be shaped by experience, stress, sleep, and sunlight. They're influenced by what you eat, how you move, and how you feel. They're not just communication hubs. They're where your life gets translated into biology. And the elegance of it all is that it happens quietly, reliably, and continuously. You don't have to ask your synapses to work. They simply do. Like the soft rustle of leaves in a forest, they whisper constantly beneath your awareness, carrying the messages that make you you. Have you ever touched something hot and yanked your hand, back before you even had time to shout an expletive or Satan a doctor's table, and watched your leg kick out involuntarily when they tapped just the right spot below your kneecap? These quick automatic movements might feel like magic, but they're actually the work of one of the body's most elegant shortcuts, the reflex arc. Reflexes are the nervous system's way of handling things without bothering the brain. That might sound a little rude, as if the spinal cord is saying, "Don't worry, I've got this one." But it's a brilliant system for staying safe and responsive when time is of the essence. And when it comes to survival, milliseconds matter. Let's break down what's happening when a reflex kicks in. Take the classic example of touching something painfully hot. A stove burner, a cup of coffee gone rogue, or perhaps a freshly microwaved plate that you absolutely certain had cooled down. The moment your skin detects that heat, sensory receptors in your fingers send an urgent signal through sensory neurons toward the spinal cord. Now, here's where things get clever. Instead of waiting for that message to go all the way to the brain, get processed, and then send a motor response back down to the hand, the spinal cord takes charge. It receives the incoming sensory information and immediately sends a return signal via motor neurons to the muscles in your arm and hand, telling them to pull away. This shortcut from sensory input to motor output, bypassing the brain's involvement until after the fact, is what's called a reflex arc. It's not that your brain is lazy or unimportant here. It's just that in situations like this, speed is more valuable than a committee meeting. You'll still feel the pain, of course, but only a fraction of a second after your body has already acted to protect itself. The reflex arc is composed of just a few essential parts: the sensory receptor, the sensory neuron, the integration center in the spinal cord, the motor neuron, and the aector, usually a muscle or gland. It's a tightly coordinated relay team, each part passing the baton with precision. Reflexes come in a variety of flavors. Some are monosaptic, meaning the sensory neuron communicates directly with the motor neuron with no middleman. These are the fastest reflexes, like the patellar reflex, the famous knee jerk. When a doctor taps that little spot just below your kneecap, it stretches the tendon and the muscle underneath. Stretch receptors in the muscle detect that change and send a signal to the spinal cord. The response: a quick command to contract the muscle and extend the leg. Simple, clean, efficient, and strangely satisfying to watch. Other reflexes are polyaptic, involving one or more interneurons between the sensory and motor neurons. These are slightly slower, but offer more complexity and coordination. The withdrawal reflex, the one that makes you pull back from something painful, is a good example. Not only do the muscles in the affected limb contract to move you away, but other muscles might relax or tighten to maintain balance, all coordinated through interneurons in the spinal cord. Your body doesn't just react, it reacts wisely. There's even a delightful little companion to the withdrawal reflex called the cross-extensor reflex. Picture this: you step on something sharp with your bare foot. Ouch! As your injured leg pulls back, your other leg automatically stiffens to support your weight and keep you from falling over. You didn't consciously think, better adjust my posture to compensate. Your spinal cord handled it before you had a chance to be clumsy. While most reflexes are there to protect you or maintain posture and balance, not all are strictly physical. Some reflexes are visceral, meaning they involve internal organs. Think about the gag reflex or the way your pupils automatically constrict in bright light. These are still reflexive actions, protective, automatic, and regulated by circuits that prioritize survival and comfort. Your body knows that bright sunlight might damage your retinas, or that something lodged in your throat could be dangerous, and it acts accordingly. Reflexes also play a huge role in development. Babies come equipped with a variety of primitive reflexes that help them survive and interact with the world in their early days. The rooting reflex, for instance, causes a baby to turn its head toward a touch on the cheek, helpful when trying to find a source of food. The palmar grasp reflex makes their tiny fingers wrap around yours when you place a finger in their palm. These early reflexes gradually fade as the nervous system matures and voluntary control takes over, but they're an important sign of healthy neurological development. Testing reflexes is actually one of the simplest and most effective ways for doctors to assess the health of the nervous system. Reflexes that are too strong, too weak, or entirely absent can indicate a problem somewhere along the neural pathway, whether it's in the sensory input, the motor output, or the integration center itself. A sluggish reflex might suggest nerve damage, while an exaggerated one could point to issues in the brain's control over spinal reflexes. It's like checking the wiring in a circuit. If the light doesn't flicker when you flip the switch, something's not quite right. Reflex arcs are also one of nature's oldest tricks. You don't need a fancy brain to have a reflex. Even simple organisms, like jellyfish or worms, exhibit reflexive responses. They don't philosophize or play chess, but they react to touch and light. These basic circuits are evolutionary gold, fast, reliable, and essential. In fact, they likely predate the evolution of brains altogether. Interestingly, not all reflexes are rigid and unchanging. With enough repetition and training, some reflexive responses can be reshaped or even suppressed. Think about athletes or musicians whose movements are so well practiced that they appear automatic. These aren't reflexes in the strict neurological sense, but they demonstrate how the nervous system can build efficient, near instantaneous responses through repetition. Over time, what began as deliberate effort becomes almost reflexive. There are also reflexes you can consciously override. If someone tosses you a ball, your instinct might be to duck, but with practice, you learn to reach out and catch it instead. Or perhaps you've suppressed a sneeze or held your breath underwater. These situations show how the conscious brain and the reflexive spinal pathways can sometimes negotiate a truce depending on the context. And yes, there are occasional quirks. Sometimes reflexes misfire or get exaggerated. Ever had a twitchy eyelid after too much caffeine? That's a hyper-excitable reflex arc at work. Or those odd little muscle jerks as you're falling asleep called hypnic jerks, which scientists believe are leftover reflexes from earlier stages of evolution. Your brain briefly thinks you're falling and your body reacts with a sudden jolt. Slightly embarrassing, but entirely normal. At their core, reflexes remind us that the body is more than just a vehicle directed by conscious thought. There's a whole world of intelligence embedded in your spinal cord, a network of rapid responders that keep you safe, stable, and upright. Without needing your explicit input, they're the security team that operates in the background, ready to act before you even know there's a problem. So whether you're dodging a wayward soccer ball, pulling your hand away from a cactus, or blinking at the sudden flash of a camera, your reflexes are quietly at work, handling the fast stuff so your brain can take its time deciding what to do next. A silent, swift team of neural shortcuts that keep you on your feet, often quite literally, without asking for credit. Just a gentle tap, a twitch, and on you go. If you could somehow shrink yourself down to the size of a molecule and wander through the human brain, you wouldn't find a neatly labeled control room with blinking lights or tidy wiring like in a computer. You'd find something far more organic, a sprawling, branching, ever-shifting landscape. It would feel less like a machine and more like a dense, whispering forest. And in this forest, neurons don't work alone. They form vast networks called neural circuits, that carry out everything from simple reflexes to the complex ballet of thought. A single neuron can do incredible things, receiving input, making decisions, and sending messages. But it's when neurons link up in structured patterns that the real magic happens. Neural circuits are groups of interconnected neurons that process specific types of information. They form the living highways and backroads of your nervous system, carrying signals across your body in an intricate, coordinated flow. The basic structure of most circuits can be broken down into three main roles: sensory input, integration, and motor output. It's a simple framework, but it's the foundation for everything from scratching your nose to composing a symphony. Let's start with sensory input. This is where the journey begins, with specialized receptors, picking up information from the world around you or from within your own body. These receptors come in all flavors: mechanoreceptors for touch and pressure, photoreceptors for light, chemoreceptors for taste and smell, and thermoreceptors for temperature. They convert environmental signals like the chill of a breeze or the texture of a fuzzy blanket into electrical impulses that neurons can understand. These impulses travel along sensory neurons toward the central nervous system. You can think of them as messengers carrying incoming news. It's cold out here, or this soup is too salty, or your foot just stepped on a Lego. These messages don't have meaning yet. They're raw data, bits and pieces of sensation waiting to be assembled. That assembly happens in the integration centers, mainly in the brain and spinal cord. This is the processing hub, the part of the circuit that takes multiple inputs, evaluates them, and decides what to do next. Integration is the nervous system's version of deliberation. It's not just receiving a message and reacting. It's receiving multiple messages, filtering out the noise, recognizing patterns, comparing current inputs with memories, expectations, and emotional states, and then forming a coherent response. This is why your nervous system doesn't overreact to every single piece of sensory input. You might not notice the feeling of your socks until someone mentions them. Your brain filters out that data because it's deemed unimportant at the moment. But if the socks are suddenly soaked with cold water, your sensory neurons will send a more urgent message, and your brain will decide it's time to pay attention. The decision M process isn't just about receiving information. It's about weighing its relevance and determining whether action is needed. Once a decision is made, motor output carries it out. Motor neurons transmit commands from the brain or spinal cord to muscles or glands, whether it's moving your arm, adjusting your breathing, or producing saliva. Motor neurons are the final link in the circuit. They translate intention into action, and that action can be voluntary, like deciding to wave hello, or involuntary, like your pupils shrinking in response to bright light. Within this basic structure, neural circuits vary tremendously in complexity. A simple reflex circuit, like the one that jerks your hand away from a hot pan, might involve just a handful of neurons, a direct line from sensory to motor with maybe a single interneuron in between. But more complex circuits like those involved in understanding language, recognizing faces, or solving a math problem, can involve millions of neurons, all firing in precise patterns across multiple regions of the brain. These complex circuits don't just sit in one part of the brain either. They span regions forming networks that handle everything from visual processing to emotional regulation. The visual cortex, for instance, doesn't just receive light data from the eyes. It analyzes shapes, motion, depth, and even color. Then sends that data to other regions that interpret it in context. Is that a bird flying past your window or a plastic bag in the wind? Different neural circuits help you decide, bringing together sight, memory, and maybe even past experience with uncooperative grocery bags. One of the most remarkable things about neural circuits is that they're not static. They can change. They grow, shrink, root, and rewire. This is thanks to a property called neuroplasticity, the ability of the nervous system to adapt based on experience. When you learn a new skill or form a memory, you're changing the structure and strength of neural circuits. New connections form between neurons, Old ones might weaken or disappear. Practice literally shapes the way your brain is wired. Imagine playing a piano scale for the first time. It feels clunky and awkward. But with repetition, the neural circuits involved in finger movement, auditory feedback, and motor planning become more efficient. The communication between neurons improves. What once felt like hard work eventually becomes second nature. Not because your fingers are smarter, but because the circuits in your brain have become finely tuned. Even when you're not actively learning, your neural circuits are in a constant state of maintenance. Some fire frequently, others rarely. Some circuits are reinforced by routine, like the ones you use to brush your teeth, while others atrophy from disuse. The brain, it turns out, is a bit like a garden. Connections that are used regularly grow strong, while others fade like untended paths in the woods. This metaphor of a forest is more than just poetic. In many ways, the brain structure resembles a complex ecosystem. Neurons stretch and branch like trees, connecting to thousands of others through synapses that pulse with electrical and chemical signals. GL cells act like gardeners and caretakers, pruning synapses, providing nutrients, and clearing away debris. Some areas of the brain are densely packed, with connections like the thicket of a jungle, while others are more spacious and open. Information doesn't travel in one straight line. It meanders, loops, and echoes. A single stimulus can ripple through multiple circuits, producing layers of response. That's why emotions can influence memory, or why a particular smell can bring back a vivid experience from years ago. The networks overlap and interact in ways that are complex, non-linear, and beautifully nuanced. Because of this complexity, the brain is often compared to a computer, but this analogy has its limits. Computers are rigid, predictable, and modular. The brain is fluid, adaptable, and deeply interconnected. It's not just about logic or binary switches. It's about timing, emotion, context, and history. Neural circuits don't just store and transmit data, they interpret it, they imbue it with meaning, they adapt to-changing conditions, and can even self-correct when things go awry. Of course, not all circuits are created equal. Some are optimized for speed, like those controlling reflexes or eye movements. Others are built for deep processing, like the circuits involved in abstract thinking or long-term memory. Some circuits become hyperactive in disorders like epilepsy, while others degrade in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Understanding how these circuits work, and sometimes fail, is one of the most active areas of neuroscience research today. And despite how much we've learned, we've only just begun to map this living network. Entire initiatives have been launched to chart the brain's genome, the full map of neural connections in the brain. It's like trying to chart every tree, vine, and moss patch in an unimaginably vast jungle, where the paths shift subtly over time and where the act of observation might itself cause change. Still, every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Every insight into how a circuit handles fear, joy, habit, or attention brings us closer to understanding not just how the brain works, but how it feels to be human. Because in the end, these circuits aren't just electrical relays. They're the architecture of thought, the pathways of personality, the infrastructure of experience. They're what let you recognize a friend's face, hum a familiar tune, or feel a sudden pang of nostalgia at the smell of fresh rain. And all of that happens within a living, breathing network of connections. A forest of murmurs that stretches from the base of your spine to the crown of your head, quietly keeping the lights on while you live your life. The world is a loud, bright, flavorful, textured place. And yet all of that sensory richness exists only as raw data until your nervous system gets involved. You don't actually see light, hear sound, or taste chocolate directly. What you experience is your brain's interpretation of electrical signals sent by specialized receptors. In other words, reality isn't just what's out there. It's what your brain tells you is out there. And it's doing that constantly, seamlessly, and usually without your conscious awareness. Let's start with one of the most familiar senses, touch. Your skin is your largest sensory organ, and it's loaded with receptors for pressure, vibration, temperature, and pain. These receptors are surprisingly specialized. Some detect light, gentle contact, like the brush of a feather. Others are tuned for deep pressure or for rapid changes in motion, like when your phone buzzes unexpectedly in your pocket. There are thermoreceptors that respond to heat and cold, and nociceptors that detect pain, a crucial, if unpopular, form of information. While pain may not be anyone's favorite sensation, it's essential for survival. It tells you when something is wrong, when tissue is damaged, or when it's time to back away from that suspiciously hot pizza slice. Once these receptors are activated, they send signals through sensory neurons to the spinal cord and then up to the brain. The signals get routed to the smarter sensory cortex, a strip of brain tissue where different parts of your body are represented in a rather peculiar map. Your hands and lips, for instance, take up a disproportionately large area because they're incredibly sensitive. Your back, meanwhile, is represented in a much smaller area, which is why you can scratch around for ages and still not find the exact itchy spot. Now, taste. That's a sense we often associate with pleasure, even if it's just the joy of morning coffee or a particularly crunchy pickle. Your tongue is covered in tiny structures called papille, and nestled within them are taste buds, microscopic clusters of receptor cells. These cells detect 5 primary tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, the savory taste associated with things like soy sauce or grilled meat. Each taste bud contains multiple receptor cells, and each cell is sensitive to one or more of these 5 categories. When you eat, chemicals in your food dissolve in saliva and interact with these receptors, which send signals to the brain via the facial and glossopharyngeal nerves. The brain takes this information and combines it with input from your sense of smell, texture from your sense of touch, and even visual cues to create what you perceive as flavor. This is why food tastes dull when you have a cold. Your olfactory input is muffled, and the brain's flavor construction process is working with limited materials. Speaking of smell, your olfactory system is both ancient and direct. Unlike other senses, smell signals bypass the thalamus, the brain's typical relay station, and go straight to the olfactory cortex and limbic system, which is heavily involved in emotion and memory. That's why a single whiff of sunscreen might send you spiraling into a vivid memory of a beach trip from childhood. It's not just nostalgia, it's neural architecture. Smell begins with odor molecules drifting through the air into your nose, where they dissolve in mucus and bind to receptors on specialized neurons in the olfactory epithelium. These neurons are remarkably diverse. Humans have around 400 different types of olfactory receptors, and each type responds to different molecular features. The brain interprets the combination of activated receptors as specific scents, from fresh, cut grass to wet dog to baking bread. Now let's shift to sound. Hearing begins when air vibrations, pressure waves enter your ear and travel down the auditory canal to the eardrum, causing it to vibrate. These vibrations are transferred through 3 tiny bones in the middle ear, charmingly named the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, which amplify the signal and send it into the cochlea, a snail-shaped structure in the inner ear filled with fluid and lined with sensory cells. Inside the cochlea, those pressure waves create ripples in the fluid which bend tiny hair cells at specific points depending on the frequency of the sound. High-pitched sounds affect one end of the cochlea, while low-pitched sounds affect the other. The movement of these hair cells opens ion channels generating electrical signals that travel along the auditory nerve to the brain's auditory cortex, where the raw data is interpreted as everything from a whisper to a thunderclap to your favorite song. Vision, arguably the most dominant sense for many people, is all about light. Photons enter your eye through the cornea and lens, which focus the light onto the retina at the back of the eye. There, 2 types of photoreceptor cells, rods and cones, convert the light into electrical signals. Rods are incredibly sensitive and handle low light vision, but they don't detect color. Cones, on the other hand, are less sensitive, but come in three types that respond to red, green, or blue light. By comparing input from these cones, your brain constructs the full spectrum of color. The signals travel through the optic nerve to the visual cortex, where they're combined, flipped, and adjusted until they form the rich, coherent image you perceive as your surroundings. Interestingly, what you see isn't just a straightforward recording. The brain fills in gaps, corrects distortions, and enhances contrast. There's a blind spot in every eye where the optic nerve exits the retina, an actual hole in your visual field, but your brain patches it over so smoothly you never notice. Vision isn't just perception, it's interpretation, artfully done in real time. And then there's a sixth sense that often flies under the radar. Proprioception. This is your sense of body position, the internal awareness of where your limbs are in space, even with your eyes closed. It's what allows you to touch your nose in the dark or walk upstairs without watching your feet. Proprioception relies on stretch receptors in muscles, tendons, and joints. These receptors send constant updates to the brain about how contracted your muscles are, how bent your joints are, and where your body is relative to itself. This information is integrated in the cerebellum and somata sensenti cortex to create a stable sense of posture and movement. Without proprioception, even basic tasks would become incredibly difficult. There are rare neurological conditions in which people lose this sense, and they must rely entirely on visual feedback to move. Watching their arms and legs to guide them, even for simple tasks like holding a cup of tea. Proprioception might not get the spotlight, but it's essential for coordinated movement and a sense of physical self. All of these sensory systems, touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight, and proprioception, are fundamentally about converting external or internal stimuli into neural signals that the brain can interpret. The diversity of receptors, the speed of processing, and the integration across different brain regions makes sensory perception one of the most impressive feats of the nervous system. And what's truly astonishing is how unified it all feels. You don't experience touch, sight, and sound as separate streams. You experience the world as a single fluid reality. The rustle of wind through leaves, the scent of petrica after rain, the feel of warm sunlight on your face. These aren't isolated events. They're blended into a seamless moment by neural circuits working in perfect harmony. Your sensory systems are always on, always scanning, always reporting back to your brain in an ongoing conversation that shapes how you move, feel, and understand the world. They don't just keep you safe. They make life richer. They let you enjoy art, savor food, recognize a loved one's voice, or marvel at the stars. They are your windows to the world, and they're cleaned, calibrated, and maintained by your nervous system with a kind of quiet excellence that rarely gets thanked. So whether you're watching the sunrise or simply feeling the texture of your favorite blanket, take a moment to appreciate the immense, invisible effort behind every sensation. You're not just perceiving the world, you're building it in real time, one signal at a time. Picture this. You decide to reach for your morning cup of tea, a completely ordinary action, something you do without thinking, and yet behind that smooth motion is a symphony of electrical signals, muscular coordination, timing, and balance, all orchestrated by your nervous system in a fraction of a second. It's not just motion, it's motor magic. Movement begins with intention, and intention begins in the brain. Specifically, it starts in an area called the motor cortex, nestled in the frontal lobe of your cerebrum. The motor cortex doesn't just randomly fire off commands. It carefully plans your movements. It decides how far your arm needs toe stretch, how much force to use, which muscles to activate, and when. All of that is calculated before your hand even begins to lift. Once the motor cortex has a plan, it sends signals down through the brainstem and into the spinal cord. These signals travel along upper motor neurons, the long-distance messengers of the central nervous system. Think of them as the executive branch of movement, issuing high instructions to the lower motor neurons that actually connect to muscles. These lower motor neurons live in the spinal cord and extend their axons out to your muscles through the peripheral nervous system. When they receive the command from the upper motor neurons, they do something remarkable. They trigger a release of a chemical called acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction, the tiny gap between a nerve ending and a muscle fiber. Acetylcholine is like a green light at a traffic signal. When it binds to receptors on the muscle cell, it sets off a chain reaction inside the muscle fiber. Calcium floods in proteins shift and the muscle contracts. If enough muscle fibers do this in coordination, your hand reaches out and voila, tea is served or spilled. But either way, your nervous system pulled it off. What's even more amazing is how specific this system can be. The brain can activate just a few motor units, which are made up of a motor neuron and the muscle fibers it controls for delicate movements like threading a needle, or recruit hundreds of motor units for something more forceful, like lifting a suitcase. Your nervous system is constantly adjusting which motor units are involved based on how much power you need. This fine-tuning happens through something called motor unit recruitment and rate coding. Recruitment refers to the number of motor units activated, while rate coding refers to how quickly those motor units fire. Fire more frequently and you get stronger, smoother contractions. This fine-tuning happens through something called motor unit recruitment and rate coding. Recruitment refers to the number of motor units activated, while rate coding refers to how quickly those motor units fire. Fire more frequently and you get stronger, smoother contractions. It's like turning up the volume knob on a stereo. More intensity, more output. Of course, motion is not just about muscle contraction. It's about coordination, precision, and timing. That's where the cerebellum comes in, the small but mighty structure at the back of your brain. The cerebellum doesn't initiate movement, but it refines it. It compares your intended motion with actual feedback from your muscles and joints, and then makes real-time corrections. Without it, movements become jerky, clumsy, and poorly timed. Say you reach out to grab a falling pen. The cerebellum makes sure your arm doesn't overshoot or arrive too late. It keeps your movements smooth, balanced, and efficient. It also stores motor learning, the patterns that let you ride a bike or play an instrument without consciously thinking about every step. Meanwhile, deep in the brain, another set of structures is hard at work, the basal ganglia. These interconnected nuclei help with movement initiation, especially when it comes to starting and stopping action smoothly. They also help filter out unhelpful or involuntary movements. When the basal ganglia don't function properly, as in Parkinson's disease, people can experience tremors, rigidity, or difficulty initiating movement. Even the simplest gesture involves multiple brain regions communicating seamlessly. The premotor cortex helps plan movements, especially those based on external cues. The supplementary motor area coordinates movements that are internally driven, like deciding to stand up from your chair. The parietal lobe provides spatial awareness, helping you locate where your limbs are relative to the world. All these systems talk to each other constantly, often milliseconds before you even notice a motion has started. Now imagine all of that happening while you dance, juggle, play the violin, or climb a flight of stairs. Complex multi-joint movements require intricate timing and feedback. The nervous system doesn't just fire off a command and hope for the best. It listens. As your muscles move, proprioceptors in your joints and tendons send continuous updates back to the brain. These updates allow the brain to make micro-adjustments mid-motion. Proprioception, your sense of body position, is vital here. It's how you can close your eyes and still touch your nose or stand on one foot without staring at your toes. It's the silent background awareness of where your body is and what it's doing. When proprioception is disrupted, even walking becomes an exercise and guesswork. In addition to proprioception, your nervous system also integrates information from your eyes, inner ears, and even skin to keep you balanced and coordinated. The inner ear contains the vestibular system, tiny structures filled with fluid and sensory hair cells that detect head movement and orientation. These signals help you maintain balance, track moving objects, and orient yourself in space. When this system gets thrown off, like during a spinning carnival ride or a bad bout of vertigo, your movements can feel wobbly and disconnected. Not all motor commands are conscious. Many are automatic, like adjusting your posture or blinking. These are handled by brainstem pathways and spinal reflexes, which operate largely without your involvement. Your nervous system is quietly running background programs to keep you upright, breathing, and not drooling on yourself while you sleep. Interestingly, motion is also influenced by emotion. Nervous, your muscles might tighten. Happy, you smile. Fearful, you might freeze or bolt. These aren't just habits. Emotional states influence motor pathways through connections between thalamic system and motor centers. Your brain doesn't just decide how to move based on physics. It weighs how you feel too. And then there's the delightful awkwardness of learning a new movement. Whether you're attempting yoga, ice skating, or using chopsticks for the first time, your movements are often clunky and imprecise. That's your brain building new motor circuits, experimenting and adjusting. It's a little like rehearsing a play. Early runs are full of missed cues and awkward pacing. But with repetition, the performance smooths out. Practice refinesces these circuits. With time, the brain shifts some of the control from conscious centers to more automatic cones. That's why skilled dancers or athletes can move fluidly without thinking about each muscle contraction. It's not just muscle memory. It's deeply trained neural pathways working with practiced efficiency. Of course, motor control isn't perfect. It's vulnerable to fatigue, distraction, and aging. As we get older, reaction times can slow, coordination might decline, and fine motor skills may need a little more concentration. But the nervous system is adaptable. With use, training, and attention, it can remain remarkably functional well into later years. Movement also brings a feedback loop of pleasure. The brain often rewards activity with endorphins and dopamine, chemical signals associated with enjoyment, motivation, and even euphoria. This is why exercise, dancing, or even stretching can feel satisfying beyond just the physical benefits. The nervous system doesn't just control motion, it celebrates it. So whether you're performing a pirouette, running for the bus, or simply reaching for your phone, in the dark, your body is responding to a cascade of electrical commands, feedback signals, and learned patterns. The muscles obey, the joints flex, the balance is adjusted, all in a quiet, lightning-fast collaboration between brain and body. It's easy to overlook because it feels effortless, but inside that effortless moment is a masterclass in coordination. A whisper of intent becomes a wave of motion. A thought becomes a step, a gesture, or a twirl. Whether it's graceful or goofy, it's still a marvel of motor magic powered by a nervous system that never stops moving. Your brain is not the same as it was yesterday or last week or 5 minutes ago. That's not poetic exaggeration. It's biology. With every experience, every thought, every attempt to remember where you left your keys, your brain is adjusting itself, not dramatically, like sprouting new lows or rewriting entire regions, but subtly, invisibly, at the level of its connections. This ability to change is called neuroplasticity, and it's one of the nervous system's most magical traits. Neuroplasticity simply means neural flexibility, and it refers to the brain's capacity to rewire itself to form new connections, strengthen old ones, and sometimes prune away the ones that are no longer needed. It's not just a feature of the young or the injured. It's happening all the time. Even as you listen to this, even as your brain quietly evaluates, adapts, and optimizes its own inner circuitry. For a long time, scientists believed the brain was fixed after childhood, that it developed rapidly early in life, and then mostly coasted into old age, like a fully furnished house that only needed occasional dusting. But now we know that's not true. The brain is more like a garden than a building. It grows, trims, adapts, and reorganizes based on what you do, what you feel, and what you need. Let's start with the basics of how connections form. Your brain is made up of billions of neurons, and each of these neurons can form thousands of synaptic connections with others. These connections aren't etched in stone. They are maintained, strengthened, weakened, or eliminated depending on how often they're used. This idea is sometimes summarized by the phrase neurons that fire together, wire together. When two neurons are repeatedly active at the same time, say one processing the sight of a cat and the other recognizing that this cat belongs to your neighbor, their connection strengthens over time. This makes the association faster and more reliable. Eventually, you see the cat and instantly think, "Oh, there's Mrs. Patel's tabby. Congratulations. Your brain just used plasticity to form a shortcut." But it's not just about creating new connections. Neuroplasticity also involves synaptic pruning, the process of trimming away connections that aren't used often. Think of it as the nervous system's way of Marie Kondoing itself. If a neural pathway doesn't spark joy or usefulness, the brain will quietly decommission it. This isn't a loss, it's an efficiency upgrade. By trimming the mental clutter, the brain makes room for more relevant, streamlined processing. This pruning is most active during childhood and adolescence, but it continues into adulthood in more subtle forms. For example, if you stop speaking a second language you once knew fluently, those language pathways may gradually weaken. The memory isn't entirely gone, it's just been tucked into the attic, and the staircase leading to it might be a bit dusty. At the same time, learning something new, a skill, a habit, a piece of information, activates and strengthens specific circuits. Repetition is key here. The more frequently you activate a pathway, the more the brain reinforces it. That's why practice matters. It's not just about getting better. It's about laying down stronger tracks. Interestingly, neuroplasticity doesn't happen uniformly across the brain. Some regions are more flexible than others. The hippocampus, for example, plays a major role in forming new memories and is one of the few areas where new neurons can actually be born throughout life in a process called neurogenesis. These newborn neurons can integrate into existing circuits and support learning and memory, particularly in response to enriched environments, physical activity, and novel experiences. Other regions like the primary visual cortex are most plastic early in life, but still capable of change if the right conditions are met. It turns out that novelty, attention, and emotional significance can all boost plasticity. The brain is more likely to rewire itself in response to things that are new, meaningful, or challenging, which might explain why learning to juggle is hard, but weirdly memorable. Plasticity isn't just about learning, though. It's also a powerful tool for healing. When the brain is injured, say after a stroke, neuroplasticity can help surrounding or even distant areas take over lost functions. This doesn't always result in a perfect recovery, but it's often enough to regain movement, speech, or basic daily abilities. Therapies for stroke patients and individuals with traumatic brain injuries frequently focus on retraining the brain by encouraging it to forge new paths around damaged areas. There are also fascinating examples of sensory reorganization. In people who are born blind, for instance, the brain regions that would normally process visual information often get recruited for other tasks like hearing or touch. The visual cortex doesn't just sit idle. It finds new ways to contribute, like helping interpret Braille through the fingertips or enhancing auditory spatial awareness. The brain is less interested in rigid job descriptions and more interested in productivity. This ability to adapt is also at the heart of habits, both good and bad. When a behavior is repeated, the associated neural pathways become stronger, more efficient. Whether it's brushing your teeth, checking your phone, or taking a walk after dinner, repetition builds automaticity. The brain doesn't ask whether a habit is helpful. It just follows the reinforcement. That's why breaking a habit requires more than just willpower. It means forming a new competing pathway and practicing it until it becomes stronger than the old one. Plasticity also plays a role in emotion and mental health. Chronic stress, for instance, can reshape neural pathways in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, areas involved in fear and decision. Over time, This can make people more sensitive to stress and less able to regulate emotional responses. But the reverse is also true. Mindfulness, therapy, and social connection can encourage the brain to form healthier patterns. Even talking about your thoughts or writing them down is a form of neural remodeling. Sleep is another powerful tool for plasticity. During rest, especially during REM sleep, the brain consolidates memories and strengthens new connections formed during the day. It's a little like saving your work before shutting down the computer. Without sleep, those new pathways are less likely to stick around. That's one reason pulling an all-nighter might help you cram, but won't help you retain the material long-term. Then there's the strange but compelling idea of phantom limbs, a dramatic example of plasticity in the sensory cortex. When someone loses a limb, the area of the brain that once processed sensations from that limb doesn't just go silent. Nearby regions begin to expand into that space. Some people can still feel sensations in the missing limb, even pain, because the brain hasn't yet updated its internal map. Over time, this can change, especially with therapy or mirror training, but it's a vivid demonstration of how flexible the brain can be, even in unusual circumstances. Technology is beginning to harness plasticity as well. Brain-computer interfaces, neurofeedback, and virtual reality rehabilitation are all designed to help people retrain or enhance their neural pathways. These tools don't work by brute force. They work by gently nudging the brain to reconfigure itself, encouraging adaptability through feedback and repetition. Plasticity is not always glamorous. It often means practicing things that feel awkward or frustrating. It means being patient with yourself when you're relearning something or trying to overcome a deeply ingrained habit. But it's also quietly hopeful, because no matter your age, your brain is never truly finished. It's a work in progress, a living, breathing, adaptable structure that listens to what you do, what you feel, and what you pay attention to, and changes in response. Right now, just by listening and thinking, you're strengthening certain connections, and perhaps pruning others. Your brain is adjusting its internal landscape ever so slightly to make room for this information. And long after this moment has passed, those changes might linger, making it easier to recall a fact, understand a concept, or appreciate the sheer miracle of a brain that can learn how to learn. It's one of the most remarkable qualities of the nervous system that it can not only react, move, and feel, but that it can also reshape itself in response to the world quietly, patiently, relentlessly. A soft rewiring in the background of your everyday life. That's the gift of plasticity, the brain's quiet superpower. Memory is one of those magical abilities that we all rely on constantly, but rarely stop to question until it lets us down. You can recall a childhood jingle from 20 years ago with perfect clarity, yet somehow forget where you left your car keys just 5 minutes ago. It's not faulty wiring. It's just the way memory works, beautifully complex, often mysterious, and sometimes hilariously selective. The nervous system doesn't store memories like files in a cabinet or data on a hard drive. It works through patterns of neural activity, strengthened connections, and coordinated chemical changes. Memory lives in networks, not folders. And it's always evolving. Some memories last seconds, others last a lifetime. Some arrive fully formed. Others hide until just the right smell or song brings them back in vivid detail. Let's start with how memory is categorized. Broadly speaking, there are 3 main types: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is the briefest kind. It holds on to raw input from your senses for just a few seconds, long enough for your brain to decide if it's worth paying attention to. You glance at a scene, hear a passing sound, or feel a sudden brush of wind, and that moment lingers for a blink before either fading or moving forward for processing. It's like the mental version of a loading screen. There, then gone. Short-term memory, sometimes called working memory, is where conscious thought happens. It's the mental notepad that holds small amounts of information for a short time, usually seconds to a minute or so. It's how you remember a phone number long enough to dial it, or keep track of which cupboard you just opened while looking for the cinnamon. On average, most people can hold about 7 bits of information in short-term memory, give or take 2, which is why phone numbers were originally designed with around that many digits. Working memory is flexible. It's not just for storage, but for juggling ideas, solving problems, and keeping track of what's happening in real time. It's the backstage, assistant in the theatre of the mind, quietly managing the props and cues that make coherent thought possible. And it's highly vulnerable to distraction. Ever walked into a room with a purpose, got distracted by a rogue sock on the floor, and then forgot while you were there? That's working memory being politely wiped clean by an unexpected interruption. Then there's long-term memory, the archive of everything from your grandmother's birthday to how to ride a bike. Long-term memory is remarkably durable. It includes facts, skills, events, and emotional associations. Some of it is conscious and deliberate, like remembering historical dates or the plot of a favorite book. This is called explicit memory. Other parts are unconscious and automatic, like knowing how to tie your shoes or type on a keyboard without looking. These are implicit memories, and they often live deeper in the brain. The process of turning a short-term memory into a long-term one is called consolidation. It's not instantaneous. Your brain needs time and often sleep to solidify those connections. That's why cramming for an exam the night before might help you pass, but won't do much for remembering the material a month later. Sleep, particularly deep and REM sleep, plays a huge role in moving memories into more permanent storage. Inside your brain, one of the key players in this process is the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure in the medial temporal lobe. The hippocampus doesn't actually store long-term memories, but it acts as a sort of processing hub. It helps link together different elements of an experience, the sights, sounds, emotions, and context so that they can be reassembled later. Over time, the memory is distributed across various cortical areas, depending on its content. Visual memories are stored near the visual cortex, auditory elements near the auditory cortex, and so on. The brain is efficient like that. Interestingly, not all memories are treated equally. Emotionally charged events tend to be remembered more vividly. This is due in part to the amygdala, a region that processes emotions and communicates with the hippocampus to boost the significance of emotional experiences. If something scares you, delights you, or makes you laugh until you snort, your brain takes note. It adds a bit of extra glue to the memory, making it more likely to stick. That said, memory is not a perfect recording. It's reconstructive, not reproductive. When you recall a memory, you're not pulling a file off a shelf. You're rebuilding it from pieces. This makes memories vulnerable to distortion. Each time you remember something, you subtly reshape it, influenced by new information, current emotions, or even the way someone else tells the story. Over time, your memories evolve, which can be charming or slightly inconvenient, depending on whether you're arguing about who actually won that board game 5 years ago. One of the most curious things about memory is how selective it is. Your brain is constantly choosing what to store and what to discard, and it doesn't always prioritize what you'd expect. You might forget what you had for lunch 2 days ago, but remember a random jingle from a cereal commercial you heard once as a kid. This isn't a flaw. It's a reflection of how the brain weighs relevance, repetition, emotional impact, and context. Forgetting in many cases is not a bug, but a feature. It helps clear out unneeded clutter, allows you to focus on new information, and even protects you from being overwhelmed by emotional overload. The brain uses processes like synaptic weakening and interference, where new information overwrites older data to manage its memory load. It's not that the memory is gone forever. It might just be harder to retrieve, especially if the retrieval cue is missing. Which brings us to the keys. Why do we so often forget where we put them? The answer is usually attention, not memory. If you set your keys down while distracted, maybe talking, checking your phone, or thinking about something else, your brain doesn't tag the event as important. It gets filed under not worth remembering. And later, when you try to retrieve the memory, there's nothing solid to grab onto. This is why making habits, like always placing your keys in the same spot, helps. It offloads memory into routine. There are also practical techniques to boost memory. Repetition is one. The more often you revisit a piece of information, the stronger the connections become. Spaced repetition. Revisiting information at increasing intervals is particularly effective for long-term retention. Chunking is another strategy where you group related bits of information into larger units. This is how you remember a phone number, or break down a shopping list into categories like dairy, produce, and snacks. Mnemonics, visualization, storytelling, all of these work by making the information more memorable, more engaging, and more emotionally resonant. Your brain loves patterns, images, and narratives. If you can turn a fact into a picture or a story, it's more likely to stick. Age can affect memory, but it's not always a straightforward decline. Some types of memory, like semantic memory and general knowledge, can remain strong or even improve with age. Other types, like working memory or recall of new information, may slow down, but thanks to neuroplasticity, the brain retains its ability to form new memories and adapt, especially when it's stimulated by learning, social interaction, physical activity, and sleep. Even in cases of memory loss, the brain is often more resilient than it seems. In conditions like Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, memories may fade. But emotional memory, the feeling attached to an experience, often remains. A person might forget your name, but still smile when they see you, because the emotional connection is still there, living in a deeper part of the brain. At its heart, memory is about meaning. The brain remembers what matters. Whether it's the face of someone you love, the smell of a childhood home, or the lyrics to that song you listen to on repeat during a particular summer, it holds on to the patterns that define who you are, what you've seen, and how you've grown. It's a quiet archivist working behind the scenes to stitch together the story of your life. And every moment you spend remembering, every chuckle at an old photo, every name that dances just out of reach, every time you pause mid-sentence because something just slipped your mind, is a reminder of how dynamic, selective, and deeply human memory really is. It's not just storage, it's the thread that connects you to yourself. Emotions are a bit like weather systems, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, occasionally foggy with a chance of snacks. They drift in, reshape your thoughts, and color everything you perceive, often without asking permission. But while feelings can feel ephemeral or mysterious, their roots are deeply biological. They're orchestrated by your nervous system, shaped by evolution, guided by chemical messengers, and played out not just in your brain, but throughout your entire body. At the center of this emotional orchestra is a collection of brain structures known as the limbic system. The term limbic comes from the Latin word for border, because this system sits like a ring around the brain, stem where ancient survival systems meet newer thinking regions. It includes several key players: the amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and parts of the thalamus and cingulate cortex. Together, they form the core of your emotional processing network. The amygdala is perhaps the most famous member of this group, often referred to as the brain's fear center. But it does more than just raise alarms. It helps you detect threats, assess emotional salience, and attach feelings to memories. When something startles you, a sudden noise, a shadow in the corner, or an unexpected pop quiz, the amygdala springs into action, sounding the internal alarm system that prepares you for action. It's fast, efficient, and sometimes a little overzealous, which is why you might jump at a garden hose that vaguely resembles a snake. Meanwhile, the hippocampus is busy recording context. Where were you when that emotional event happened? What were you doing, smelling, hearing? It lays down the backdrop, allowing memories to be revisited later with vivid detail. That's why emotions are such powerful memory aids. They help stamp moments into the brain's record books. The hypothalamus, sitting just below the thalamus, is a tiny but mighty structure that links the nervous system to the endocrine system. When activated by emotional stimuli, it sends signals to the pituitary gland, which then releases hormones into the bloodstream. These hormones influence your body's responses, raising your heart rate, dilating your pupils, altering your digestion, all of which contribute to the physical feeling of emotion. This hormonal response is why emotions don't stay confined to the brain. They ripple through the body, influencing organs, muscles, and even your posture. Anxiety might tighten your stomach. Joy might give you a literal bounce in your step. Sadness can weigh down your shoulders. These aren't just poetic descriptions. They're physiological realities shaped by nerves, hormones, and feedback loops. The nervous system has two major branches involved in emotional regulation: the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic system prepares you for fight or flight, increasing heart rate, redirecting blood to muscles, slowing digestion. The parasympathetic system helps you rest, digest, and return to baseline. Emotions often arise from the balance between these two forces. For example, fear typically ramps up sympathetic activity. You might feel a racing heart, shallow breathing, cold hands, and a sudden need to scan your surroundings for exits. These are survival tools. Your body is preparing to either confront danger or escape it. Once the threat passes, the parasympathetic system works to calm things down. It slows your heart, relaxes your muscles, and tells your body, "We're okay now." But emotions are rarely that simple. Most feelings are blends. Fear mixed with excitement, sadness tinged with relief, happiness shaded by nostalgia. Your brain doesn't just flip one switch. It activates multiple regions, compares past experiences, reads social cues, and sometimes even consults your gut quite literally. The enteric nervous system, often called the second brain, resides in your gastrointestinal tract and communicates closely with the central nervous system. This is why anxiety can cause stomach upset and why you sometimes feel emotions in your belly before you fully understand them in your head. Chemicals also play a starring role. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and oxytocin modulate emotional states in different ways. Dopamine is associated with reward and motivation. It spikes when you achieve a goal, eat something delicious, or get a compliment. Serotonin influences mood, sleep, and appetite, and is a major player in many antidepressant medications. Norepinephrine, like adrenaline, revs up alertness and arousal. Oxytocin is often dubbed the love hormone because it strengthens social bonds, trust, and attachment, released during hugs, eye contact, and those lovely moments when a dog looks at you like you're the center of the universe. These chemicals don't act in isolation. They interact in a constantly shifting neurochemical dance influenced by genetics, environment, experience, and behavior. Even something as simple as taking a walk in nature, getting a good night's sleep, or hearing a favorite song can nudge your emotional chemistry in a different direction. Your brain is never emotionally neutral. It's always balancing and recalibrating. Interestingly, the prefrontal cortex, the more recently evolved part of the brain responsible for reasoning and decision plays a key role in regulating emotion. It evaluates input from the limbic system and helps modulate responses should you panic at the spider on the windowsill or calmly escort it outside. The prefrontal cortex weighs in and ideally keeps the amygdala from hijacking the entire operation. In people with strong emotional regulation, this region tends to be especially active and well-coned. Of course, emotion isn't always about threat or reward. It also plays a huge role in empathy, the ability to feel what others feel. Mirror neurons, first discovered in monkeys and later identified in humans, are specialized cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. These neurons may help explain why we flinch when someone stubs their toe, or why a character's heartbreak in a film can leave us in tears. Social and cultural factors also shape how emotions are expressed and interpreted. Your brain comes with a universal emotional toolkit, but it's fine-tuned by upbringing, language, and social norms. A smile means joy in most cultures, but the way we express grief, anger, or embarrassment can vary widely. Even how we describe emotions can influence how we feel them. Giving a name to a complex feeling can sometimes shrink it down to a more manageable size. Emotions also serve a powerful evolutionary function. Fear helps avoid danger. Anger protects boundaries. Sadness signals a need for support. Joy reinforces beneficial behaviors. Even guilt, uncomfortable as it is, helps maintain social harmony by nudging us to reflect and repair relationships. Emotions aren't just noise, they're data, and the nervous system is the instrument that decodes and broadcasts them. When things go awry, emotional regulation can become a challenge. Anxiety disorders, depression, mood swings, and emotional numbness can all reflect imbalances in the emotional network, whether due to neurotransmitter dysfunction, structural differences in brain regions, traumatic experiences, or chronic stress. But because the nervous system is plastic and responsive, therapy, medication, mindfulness, and social connection can often help rewire those circuits over time. Even the simple act of taking slow, deep breaths can calm the nervous system. It activates the vagus nerve, a major component of the parasympathetic system, which tells the brain, "We're safe. You can relax." Now, this creates a feedback loop that reduces heart rate, softens tension, and clears the emotional fog. Sometimes the most profound nervous system interventions are also the most gentle. What's most remarkable is how integrated all of this is. Emotions are not just brain states. They are full-body experiences shaped by history, chemistry, reflexes, memories, and context. You don't just think emotions, you feel them in your skin, your chest, your breath, your gut. Whether it's the warm glow of affection, the tight grip of fear, or the quiet ache of longing, every feeling is a symphony conducted by your nervous system, sometimes loud and dramatic, other times subtle and slow. And like any good symphony, it doesn't just affect the players. It moves the audience, in this case you, in ways that can be profound, unpredictable, and deeply human. The lights go out. You crawl under the covers. Your eyes close. The day slips away like a tide retreating from shore. To the outside world, it may seem like nothing is happening, just a quiet, resting body. But inside your head, your brain is anything but idle. Sleep is not a passive shutdown. It's one of the most active and mysterious states your nervous system enters. It's a nightly renovation, memory workshop, emotional recalibration, and occasionally a surreal theater of dreams. First, let's clear up a common misconception. Sleep is not a time when your brain turns off. Quite the opposite. Certain areas of the brain become even more active during parts of sleep than they are when you're awake. It's just that their priorities change. While you snooze, your brain is sorting, filing, cleaning, strengthening, and even dreaming, all in the background, like a housekeeping staff that only works after dark. Your sleep is divided into cycles, each lasting roughly 90 minutes and repeating throughout the night. These cycles are made up of several distinct stages categorized as non-REM and RM, short for rapid eye movement. Non-REM sleep comes in 3 stages. The first stage is light and fleeting, a transitional drift between wakefulness and slumber. In this phase, you might still hear the hum of the world around you, and a sudden noise or twitch might jolt you awake. This is the stage where hypnic jerks, those sudden full body spasms, often occur. It's like your nervous system doing a quick systems check before deeper rest. The second stage is deeper, where heart rate slows, body temperature drops, and brain waves begin to shift into slower patterns. It's a place of true disconnection from the waking world. While you're not yet in deep sleep, you're no longer easily disturbed. Your nervous system uses this time to settle into a low power state, lowering metabolic activity, conserving energy, and preparing for what comes next. Then comes stage 3, deep sleep, also known as slow wave sleep. This is the most restorative phase. Brain waves become slow and high in amplitude, like rolling hills on an EEG readout. Your muscles relax completely, and your body focuses on repair and recovery. Growth hormone is released, tissues are mended, immune functions are bolstered. If someone tries to wake you during this phase, you'll probably be groggy and disoriented and possibly not very polite about it. But the real party starts during REM sleep. This is the phase most associated with dreaming. As your brain revs up, your eyes dart back and forth under your eyelids. Your breathing becomes irregular, and your brain waves start to resemble those of someone who's awake. Yet, your body remains largely paralyzed, a clever trick of the nervous system to keep you from acting out your dreams. Most skeletal muscles are temporarily turned off by inhibitory signals from the brainstem. It's a neurological lock to keep your sleep safe from your imagination. Dreams are still something of a scientific puzzle. We know they occur most vividly during sleep, though fragments of dreams can appear in other stages too. Theories about why we dream range from emotional processing and memory consolidation to mental rehearsals, or even neural noise being interpreted into narrative. Whatever the reason, your brain during REM is synthesizing images, emotions, and memories into a kind of movie, often strange, sometimes meaningful, and occasionally starring people you haven't seen since 7th grade. But even beyond dreaming, sleep plays a vital role in memory and learning. Throughout the day, your brain gathers new information and stores it in a sort of mental inbox. During sleep, especially during deep non-REM and REM stages, the brain sorts through that inbox, deciding what to keep, what to discard, and where to file the important bits. This process is called memory consolidation, and it strengthens the neural pathways that support the things you've learned. It's one reason that getting enough sleep is so crucial after studying or learning a new skill. Even a quick nap can enhance performance on certain tasks. It's not just rest, it's rehearsal. While you snooze, the brain replays patterns of activity that occurred during the day, reinforcing connections and helping them stick. Sleep also has a remarkable effect on emotional regulation. Studies show that people who are sleep deprived tend to be more emotionally reactive, more irritable, and less able to cope with stress. The amygdala, your brain's emotional alarm system, becomes more sensitive, while the prefrontal cortex, which normally keeps it in check, becomes sluggish. In other words, without sleep, your brain is like a toddler who missed their nap, cranky, impulsive, and a little dramatic. But with proper sleep, especially with enough, the brain seems to perform an emotional reset. It helps you process the ups and downs of the day, smoothing out emotional rough edges and helping you wake up a little more balanced. That weird dream about being late for an exam in a building made of cheese, it may not make sense, but it might still be doing something helpful behind the scenes. On a cellular level, sleep is also a time for cleaning house. Recent research has revealed that during sleep, the brain's lymphatic system becomes more active. This system helps clear out waste products that accumulate during wakefulness, including excess proteins linked to neurological diseases like Alzheimer's. Think of it as a nightly rinse cycle for your brain. Subtle, essential, and only possible when you're not using it to do more active tasks. Importantly, neurons never truly stop working, even during the deepest sleep. Their patterns shift, their priorities change, but they remain active, keeping your heart beating, lungs expanding, and internal environment stable. The autonomic nervous system continues its background magic, regulating temperature, digestion, hormone release, and 1,000 other tasks that don't punch out just because you've gone to bed. Even in dreams, neurons are firing across sensory areas, motor planning zones, and emotional centers. The brain doesn't just store old memories, it recombines them, plays with them, sometimes creates new associations. This flexibility may be part of what makes humans so creative. Sleep might not just help us remember what happened, it may help us imagine what could be. Despite its importance, sleep is still a bit of a biological mystery. We know what happens during different stages, and we can track its benefits. But the full reason why sleep is so essential and why evolution preserved it across so many species is still being uncovered. Dolphins sleep with half their brain at a time. Birds can sleep mid-flight. Even fruit flies show sleep-like behavior. It's clear that whatever sleep is doing, it's worth the risk of lying motionless for hours in a world full of predators. In humans, the effects of sleep deprivation are quick and profound. After just one sleepless night, Attention, coordination, and memory begin to falter. Prolonged sleep loss affects metabolism, immune function, mood, and even gene expression. It's not just about feeling tired. Sleep is woven into every aspect of health and cognitive function. That's why the sleepy brain is not a lazy brain. It's a busy, purposeful, hard-working organ that just happens to do its best maintenance work while you're out cold. It repairs, sorts, cleans, and creates. All while you dream of penguins, parallel universes, or accidentally showing up to work in your pajamas. So the next time you lie down, think of it not as checking out, but as checking into a quiet, restorative neural retreat. Your nervous system knows what to do. All you have to do is drift. You don't think about making your heart beat. Neurons that need to carry fast, sharp, or long-distance signals usually get the VIP treatment with myelin sheets. These include motor neurons, sensory neurons involved in touch and proprioception, and many neurons involved in reflex arcs. But other neurons, particularly those involved in slower or more diffuse signaling, remain unmyelinated or only lightly coated. Pain signals, for example, often travel along thinner, unmyelinated fibers, which is why the burning ache of an injury may arrive moments after the initial sharp jab. The nervous system knows how to prioritize traffic. Myelin isn't fully formed at birth. In fact, much of the process of myelination happens after birth and continues well into young adulthood. This slow, staggered development is why babies don't pop out doing algebra or acrobatics. The nervous system needs time to wire itself efficiently. You can see this progression in action as babies learn to crawl, walk, talk, and eventually master things like shoelaces and sarcasm. Myelin is what turns those early wobbles into smooth, controlled movement and refined cognitive skill. But like all biological systems, myelin can be vulnerable. One condition that brings this into sharp focus is multiple sclerosis, or MS. This is a chronic illness in which the immune system mistakenly attacks the myelin in the central nervous system. When the myelin sheath is damaged, the electrical signals along the axon become slowed or disrupted like a frayed wire that can no longer carry current properly. This can lead to a wide range of symptoms, depending on which areas are affected. In MS, the symptoms can vary from person to person. Some may experience muscle weakness or coordination problems, while others might notice blurred vision, fatigue, numbness, or cognitive changes. These symptoms can come and go, flare up unexpectedly, or gradually worsen. It's a condition that reminds us just how vital and fragile myelin really is. When myelin is damaged, the body attempts to repair it. Oligodrates can sometimes regenerate lost myelin, especially in the early stages of the disease. But over time, if the damage is repeated or widespread, the axons themselves can become injured, leading to more permanent neurological deficits. Research is ongoing into how to protect, regenerate, or replace myelin, an area full of both challenges and hope. Beyond multiple sclerosis, other conditions can also affect myelin. Some genetic disorders, like leukodystrophies, disrupt the formation of myelin in children. Certain toxins, vitamin deficiencies, and infections can also damage myelin or interfere with its maintenance. Even prolonged stress or lack of sleep may influence how effectively the brain maintains its myelin. Though this area is still being explored, yet despite these vulnerabilities, myelin is an incredibly durable structure. In most people, it lasts a lifetime, faithfully wrapping and maintaining nerve fibers across billions of signals a day. It's rebuilt and maintained by glial cells that monitor and support the health of the nervous system. They're like quiet custodians, keeping things in top shape while their neurons do their thinking, moving, and sensing. Interestingly, learning a new skill can also influence myelin production. Studies have shown that when people engage in activities that require sustained mental effort, like playing a musical instrument or learning a new language, their brains may respond by increasing myelination in relevant areas. This suggests that myelin is not just about insulation, but also about optimization. The nervous system is always trying to find the most efficient way to do things, and myelin is part of that process. Even in adulthood, myelin can continue to adapt to new experiences. A quiet testament to the plasticity of the nervous system. It adjusts, repairs, strengthens, and occasionally falters, but it never stops working to keep your thoughts running smoothly. So whether you're leaping out of the way of a rogue frisbee, solving a puzzle, or simply blinking in surprise, remember that each of those actions depended on the speed and fidelity of neural communication. And none of that would be possible without myelin, the silky spiraled wrapping that turns a flicker of neural intention into action at the speed of thought. It's not the star of the show, but without it, the whole production would grind to a halt, one sluggish signal at a time. Neurons tend to steal the spotlight. They fire the action potentials, carry your thoughts, move your muscles, and relay your feelings. They're the ones with all the flashing lights in the brain diagrams, the ones everyone points to when talking about intelligence, emotion, and memory. But behind those high-air-forming showboats is a vast, loyal support crew. The glia cells quietly holding everything together. And while they don't conduct electricity like neurons, without them, your brain would be about as useful as a theatre without. A backstage, the name glia comes from the Greek word for glue, which gives a rather humble impression, as though they're just there to keep things stuck in place. But that's like saying a city sanitation department just takes out the trash. In reality, GAL cells do everything from regulating blood flow and delivering nutrients to repairing injury, pruning synapses, and even influencing how neurons communicate. They are the architects, janitors, nurses, and electricians of the nervous system, and they outnumber neurons by a significant margin. Let's start with ostrids, named for their star-shaped appearance under the microscope. These cells are the multitaskers of the brain. They maintain the chemical balance around neurons, mop up excess neurotransmitters, regulate ions, and help guide developing neurons during early brain growth. They're the kind of colleague who restocks the coffee, rewires your desk, lamp, fixes the thermostat, and still remembers your birthday. Astrocytes also form part of the blood-brain barrier, a semi-permeable shield that controls what substances in the blood are allowed into the brain's delicate environment. This is a vital job. The brain needs a constant supply of oxygen and glucose, but it also needs protection from toxins, pathogens, and certain chemicals that could throw off its finely tuned chemistry. Astrocytes help regulate what gets in, keeping the peace at the border. And when injury strikes, a concussion, a stroke, or a rogue virus, astrocytes leap into action. They swell, change shape, and form a kind of scar tissue around the damaged area. This can be both helpful and problematic. It seals off the danger zone, but sometimes interferes with regrowth. Still, they're doing their best under pressure, trying to manage damage while keeping the rest of the brain running smoothly. Then there are the microglia, the brain's own personal immune force. These are the smallest of the GAL cells, but they pack a punch. Constantly patrolling the nervous system, they look for signs of trouble, dead cells, foreign invaders, or proteins that don't belong. When they find something suspicious, they respond swiftly, engulfing and digesting the threat in a process called phagocytosis. It's not glamorous, but it's absolutely critical. Microglia also help during development by trimming synapses. When the brain is forming, it tends to create far more connections than it actually needs. Microglia act like sculptors, carving away the extra connections tore fine and streamline the network. This synaptic pruning continues into adolescence and plays a key role in shaping how your brain functions. Interestingly, researchers have discovered that microglia are sensitive not only to injury and infection, but also to stress, sleep deprivation, and chronic inflammation. When overstimulated, they can become overzealous, contributing to conditions like neurodegenerative disease or chronic pain. Like many things in biology, balance is everything. Even the immune cells of the brain need to know when to act and when to stand down. Next on the roster are the oligodendrites, which are arguably the most fashion-forward of the glial world given their talent for wrapping axons in myelin. Each oligodendrite can extend multiple arms to different neurons, sheathing segments of axons in thick fatty insulation. This insulation speeds up the transmission of electrical signals like fiber optic cables laid across a city, ensuring that messages arrive quickly and clearly. The importance of myelin is hard to overstate. Without it, thoughts would crawl, reflexes would falter, and coordinated movement would be an exhausting mess. Oligodendrites don't just install this insulation. They maintain it, checking for damage and making repairs as needed. They are the quiet maintenance workers behind the scenes, ensuring the brain's messages travel at top speed. In the peripheral nervous system, their role is played by Schwann cells. These operate much the same way, but with a more one-tune relationship. Each Schwann cell wraps around a single segment of a single axon. They also assist in regeneration. If a nerve is damaged outside the brain and spinal cord, Schwann cells can help guide the regrowth process. That's part of why peripheral nerves can sometimes recover after injury, whereas central nervous system damage is usually more permanent. But GAL support doesn't stop there. There are also appendal cells which line the ventricles of the brain and help produce cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that cushions the brain, removes waste, and keeps things chemically balanced. It's like the brain's private ESPA, refreshed and circulated thanks to these modest but important cells. All of these GAL cells work together in intricate harmony. While neurons may get the headlines for forming memories, generating thoughts, and controlling movement, they rely entirely on GAL support. Neurons are needy. They require constant nourishment, protection from chemical imbalances, stable temperature, and timely cleanups of their waste. GLE provide all of that and more. You don't consciously tell your stomach to start digesting lunch, or remind your lungs to breathe in before you yawn. These things just happen. They run smoothly in the background like an invisible operating system, managing the most essential parts of your existence without ever demanding your attention. That system is called the autonomic nervous system, and it is quite fittingly one of the quietest but most powerful supervisors in your body. The word autonomic comes from autonomous, which means self-governing, and that's exactly what this system does. It takes care of all the vital functions that don't require your conscious input. Your heartbeat, blood pressure, breathing rate, digestion, pupil dilation, body temperature, and even how much you sweat are all modulated by this built-in life support system. It's not glamorous, but it's incredibly efficient. A tireless background orchestra tuning and adjusting every second of the day. The autonomic nervous system has two major branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. These two systems are often described as working in opposition, but they're really more like dance partners, each taking the lead at different times, depending on what life throws at you. Let's meet the more dramatic of the two first, the sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight-or-flight mode, then an alarm system that gets triggered when something startling or stressful occurs. When your brain perceives a threat, whether it's a snake in the grass or an unread email with the subject line urgent, the sympathetic system springs into action. In response, it kicks off a rapid series of physiological changes. Your heart rate speeds up, pumping more oxygenated blood to your muscles. Your pupils dilate to let in more light and improve vision. Airways open up to help you breathe more deeply. The digestive system hits the brakes because who needs to digest a sandwich when there might be a tiger nearby? Blood is routed away from the stomach and toward the limbs, readying you to run or react. All of this happens within moments, and you don't have to lift a finger. That sudden feeling of adrenaline, that's thanks to the sympathetic nervous system, working closely with the endocrine system. It sends signals to the adrenal glands perched just above your kidneys, which release hormones like adrenaline and norepinephrine into your bloodstream, turbocharging your response. Of course, most of us aren't dealing with tigers, but modern life still gives the sympathetic nervous system plenty of excuses to chime in. Public speaking, deadlines, phone calls you didn't expect, loud noises, or even an awkward pause in conversation. Your body doesn't always distinguish between an existential threat and mild embarrassment. If it feels urgent, their response is similar. That's where the parasympathetic nervous system comes in. This is your rest and digest mode, the calming counterpart to the sympathetic system's high alert enthusiasm. Its job is to bring things back, toe a line after the storm has passed. It slows the heart rate, promotes digestion, constricts the pupils back to normal, and encourages relaxation and repair. The parasympathetic system is largely responsible for helping your body perform maintenance. It helps produce saliva, stimulate intestinal activity, and manage the slow and steady business of keeping you alive when nothing dramatic is happening. It also supports immune function, sexual arousal, and energy conservation. In short, it's your nervous system's built-in spa day. One of the key pathways of the parasympathetic system is the vagus nerve, a long meandering nerve that extends from your brainstem all the way down through your chest and into your abdomen. It's involved in regulating heart rate, digestion, and vocal cord function, among other things. It even plays a role in inflammation and immune signaling, stimulating the vagus nerve through slow breathing, humming, singing, or cold exposure can actually help reduce stress and improve emotional well-being. The balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems is known as autonomic tone. Ideally, your body shifts smoothly between the two as needed. If you're in danger, the sympathetic system takes the lead. Once you're safe, the parasympathetic system brings you back to a state of calm. But modern stresses can sometimes cause the sympathetic system to stay active for longer than it should, leading to chronic tension, elevated blood pressure, and fatigue. Fortunately, your nervous system is highly responsive to cues from both your environment and your behavior. Deep breathing, for instance, sends signals to the brain that you're safe. This slows the heart rate and activates the parasympathetic response. Meditation, stretching, nature walks, and even laughing can also tip the balance toward relaxation. Interestingly, some organs are controlled by both systems in a kind of push-pull relationship. The heart, for example, speeds up under sympathetic influence and slows down under parasympathetic control. The digestive system, on the other hand, is inhibited by the sympathetic system and stimulated by the parasympathetic system. It's like having two managers with different priorities, one focused on emergency preparedness, the other on daily operations. Not every organ is under such dual control. Sweat glands, for instance, are primarily managed by the sympathetic system. That's why anxiety often leads to clammy palms or a suspiciously damp shirt at the worst possible moment. It's not your fault. It's biology trying its best to keep you cool under pressure. The autonomic nervous system also plays a crucial role during sleep. As you begin to drift off, parasympathetic activity increases, helping your body wind down. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, and digestion resumes its unhurried rhythm. If something wakes you suddenly, a noise, a bad dream, or a mystery bump in the night, the sympathetic system can kick in almost instantly, bringing you to alertness before you're even fully aware of what's happening. Another fascinating feature of the autonomic system is its involvement in emotional responses. Think about blushing, a flushed face during anger, a lump in your throat when you're sad, or butterflies in your stomach before a big moment. These are visceral expressions of emotional states routed through autonomic pathways. The nervous system doesn't just manage your body, it expresses your inner world through it. Disorders of the autonomic nervous system, while rare, can have wide-ranging effects. Conditions like dysautonomia, orthostatic hypertension, or vasovagal syncope involve disruptions in autonomic regulation. These can cause symptoms like dizziness, fainting, abnormal heart rates, and difficulties with temperature control or digestion. Because the autonomic system touches so many body systems, even minor dysfunctions can be disruptive. Yet most of the time, this system functions quietly and flawlessly, keeping you balanced between action and rest, danger and safety, tension and release. It's the part of the nervous system that never takes a bow, never demands applause, but still deserves a standing ovation. So the next time you find your heart racing, your breath quickening, or your shoulders relaxing after a deep exhale, remember your autonomic nervous system is hard at work behind the scenes. It's the silent supervisor, always listening, always adjusting, always keeping you just the right amount of ready. Not too tense, not too loose, just enough to keep you alive and responsive. Whether you're running from imaginary tigers or enjoying a very real nap, if neurons are the body's electrical wires, then myelin is the insulation that keeps the current running cleanly and quickly. It's not flashy, but it's absolutely essential. Without myelin, thoughts would move like molasses, reflexes would crawl, and simple movements would become frustrating puzzles of delay. Myelin is the unsung hero of the nervous system. A fatty, whitish substance that wraps around certain nerve fibers like a cozy high-performance blanket, ensuring that messages travel with speed and precision. Let's back up for a moment. Every time you move a finger, blink an eye, or even ponder a daydream, electrical impulses race through your neurons, leaping from one end of the cell to the other. These impulses are called action potentials, and they travel along long projections known as axons. For some neurons, those axons can stretch surprisingly far, several feet in fact, especially in motor neurons that run from the spinal cord down to the toes. Now, imagine trying to send a signal down that kind of length with no insulation. The message would lose energy, slow down, and possibly leak into the surrounding environment. That's where myelin steps in. Myelin acts like the rubber coating on electrical cables, except it's made by living cells and is even more efficient. In the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, myelin is produced by specialized cells called oligodendrites. Each of these cells can extend its processes to multiple axons, wrapping segments of each in layers of myelin. In the peripheral nervous system, which includes all the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord, a different type of cell takes over, the Schwann cell. These cells wrap around axons like cinnamon rolls, forming a thick protective sheath. Myelin isn't applied as a continuous tube, though. It wraps axons in segments, leaving tiny gaps between the insulated parts. These gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier, and they are not design flaws. They're brilliant features. When an electrical impulse reaches one of these nodes, it briefly depolarizes the membrane, then jumps to the next node. This leapfrogging process, called salty conduction, allows the signal to travel much faster than it would if it had to move steadily down the entire axon. It's a bit like skipping every other step on a staircase instead of taking each one. Much faster and still just as reliable. Thanks to myelin. In recent years, the view of GL cells has shifted dramatically. They're no longer seen as just support staff, but as active participants in neural function. Astrocytes, for example, are now known to influence synaptic transmission. They release their own signaling molecules, sometimes referred to as gliotransmitters, that can modulate how neurons fire and communicate. GA also seem to play a role in learning and memory. Some studies suggest that the interaction between neurons and astrocytes affects how long-term memories are stored and recalled. It's a partnership, not a solo act. Like any well-run system, the brain depends on collaboration, and GA are deeply involved in the choreography. Even in mental health, GAL cells are gaining attention. Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's have all been linked in some way to glial function. Whether it's inflammation from overactive microglia or disrupted communication from damaged oligodendrites, the quiet work of GA can have profound effects when things go wrong. There's also something poetically reassuring about GA. They don't demand the spotlight. They don't fire action potentials or make bold decisions, but they are absolutely essential, showing up day after day, regulating, supporting, and cleaning up. They remind us that the most important jobs aren't always the loudest, that behind every action, every thought, every flicker of consciousness, there is a quiet workforce making sure the system runs. So the next time you think, remember, move or feel. Know that your glial cells are there with you, forming the scaffolding of experience, the support beams of cognition, the janitors and architects of the mind. You might not hear them, but without them, you wouldn't hear anything at all. The nervous system is a marvel of design, a delicate, intricate web of circuits and signals that manages everything from muscle twitches to symphonies of thought. Most of the time, it hums along beautifully like a well-tuned orchestra playing the symphony of life without missing a beat. But sometimes things don't go quite as planned. Like any complex system, the nervous system is vulnerable to disruption. These disruptions can come in many forms, from tiny chemical imbalances to larger structural injuries. And when they do, we see the effects in conditions we call neurological disorders. Now, before we dive in, it's worth noting that this is not a tale of doom and gloom. While neurological disorders can be serious, they're also an area where medicine, science, and the human spirit shine. Advances in understanding, treatment, and support have brought enormous progress and continue to do so every day. In many cases, people adapt, improve, and live meaningful, rich lives. The brain, after all, is a master of compensation and resilience. Let's begin with Parkinson's disease, a condition named after the British Dr. James Parkinson, who first described it in the early 1800s. It's a progressive disorder that primarily affects movement caused by the gradual loss of dopamine-producing. Neurons in a part of the brain, called the substantia dopamine among its many roles, is crucial for smooth and coordinated muscle activity. Without enough of it, the motor circuits of the brain start to falter. The most common symptoms of Parkinson's include tremors, often starting in the hands, stiffness, slow movement, and balance difficulties. Facial expressions may become more subdued, handwriting might shrink, and simple tasks like buttoning a shirt can take more effort. But it's not just about motion. Parkinson's can also affect mood, sleep, digestion, and even smell. There's currently no cure, but there are many treatments that help manage symptoms. Medications like levodopa can temporarily restore dopamine levels, giving the brain back some of its missing chemical messenger. Other drugs help the body make better use of the dopamine that's left or block its breakdown. In some cases, deep brain stimulation, a kind of pacemaker for the brain, can reduce tremors and improve control. And just as important as medications are lifestyle supports. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and emotional care all help people with Parkinson's navigate daily life more confidently. Then there's epilepsy, a condition that's often misunderstood. Epilepsy is not a disease in itself, but a group of conditions marked by recurrent, unprovoked seizures. A seizure is a sudden surge of electrical activity in the brain, sort of like a thunderstorm in the neural sky. These surges can affect movement, awareness, sensation, or even emotion, depending on where in the brain they occur. Some seizures are dramatic, the kind you might picture with shaking limbs and loss of consciousness. Others are far more subtle. A brief pause in conversation, a staring spell, or a sudden sense of déjà vu. They can last a few seconds or several minutes. For people with epilepsy, the unpredictability of seizures can be one of the most challenging aspects. Epilepsy has many possible causes: genetic factors, head injury, infections, stroke, or developmental abnormalities. But in many cases, the exact cause isn't known. The good news is that it's often treatable. Anti-epileptic medications can control seizures in the majority of people. And for those who don't respond to medication, there are surgical options, dietary, therapies, and neurostimulators that can help. What's also worth celebrating is the growing understanding that epilepsy doesn't define a person. It's a condition, not an identity. And with the right support, many people with epilepsy live full, independent lives. Awareness and education are helping reduce stigma and build more accommodating communities. Now, let's look at stroke, one of the most common and sudden neurological events. A stroke happens when blood flow to part of the brain is interrupted either by a blockage called an ischemic stroke or by bleeding from a ruptured vessel, a hemorrhagic stroke. Since the brain relies on a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients, even a short disruption can cause cells to suffer already. The effects of a stroke depend on where in the brain it occurs. If it affects the left side, speech and language might be impacted. If it's on the right, spatial awareness could take a hit. Some people have weakness or paralysis on one side of the body, changes in vision, or difficulties with balance and coordination. In some cases, stroke can also affect personality or cognitive function. Time is critical with stroke. The faster a person gets treatment, ideally within a few hours, the better the chances of minimizing damage. There's a handy acronym used in public health campaigns: face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call emergency services. Quick recognition can save lives and reduce disability. Recovery from stroke varies, but the brain is remarkably adaptable. Through a process called neuroplasticity, other parts of the brain can take over lost functions. Rehabilitation is often a team effort involving physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, and caregivers. Progress may be slow at times, but it happens sometimes in big leaps, sometimes in tiny, meaningful gains. Other neurological conditions also deserve mention. Multiple sclerosis, where the immune system attacks the myelin sheath that insulates nerve fibers. Alzheimer's disease, a degenerative condition that gradually erodes memory and thinking skills. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, which affects motor neurons and leads to progressive muscle weakness. These conditions, though each very different, highlight how diverse and complex the nervous system can be and how many ways it can be challenged. But in every case, there is a growing body of research, compassion, and support. Scientists are exploring new treatments using gene editing, stem cells, and targeted immunotherapies. Devices and apps are helping with daily tasks, communication, and tracking symptoms. Support groups and communities are making it easier to share experiences, resources, and encouragement. There's also a deeper kind of hope, the kind that comes not just from medicine, but from resilience. People with neurological disorders often become quiet experts in adaptation. They learn to listen to their bodies, to adjust routines, to ask for help when needed. They build new pathways, sometimes literally, as their brains find alternate ways to communicate, move, and remember. And families, caregivers, and friends become part of that journey too. It's a reminder that the nervous system isn't just a collection of cells. It's a living network of connection, not only within the body, but between people. Even when the system breaks, there's beauty in how it tries to heal, in how it rewires, finds workarounds, and adapts. In the small victories, a steady hand, a recalled word, a walk across the room, in the dignity of persistence, in the quiet strength it takes to live with uncertainty. So, while neurological disorders can be serious and sometimes frightening, they're also a testament to just how astonishing the nervous system is, not because it's perfect, but because of how much it can endure, how much it can adapt, and how many people are working to understand it better every day. There's always more to learn, always more hope to be found, and always more stories of courage, creativity, and the remarkable resilience of the human mind. The nervous system has always been quietly extraordinary. A humming network of connections managing everything from your morning stretch to your deepest thoughts. But what if this quiet system could one day be upgraded? Not in the science fiction sense of downloading Kung Fu into your brain or installing Bluetooth in your cerebellum, although who knows, but through real advances that restore, enhance, and maybe even extend the nervous system's abilities in ways once thought impossible. We're living in an age where science is beginning to tap directly into the brain's electrical language, and the results so far have been nothing short of astonishing. Let's start with brain-computer interfaces, or BCIS. These are systems that allow direct communication between the brain and an external device. No keyboard, no mouse, no voice commands, just thought. At their simplest, BCIs use sensors to detect patterns of electrical activity from the brain, translate those patterns into digital signals, and use them to control something. A robotic arm, a computer cursor, a speech synthesizer, or even a drone. Yes, people have literally flown drones with their minds. One of the most promising applications of BCIs is restoring movement and communication for people with paralysis or locked-in syndrome. In some remarkable cases, individuals have used implanted electrodes to type out messages, control wheelchairs, or even grasp objects using robotic limbs that respond to their neural signals. The systems aren't perfect yet, They can be slow, require training, and rely on advanced hardware, but the progress has been faster than many expected. One reason this works is that the brain, even when disconnected from the body, continues to issue motor commands. For example, someone who's lost the ability to move their hand can still think about moving it, and the motor cortex still lights up as if the hand were obeying. BCIs tap into those signals and redirect them elsewhere. It's a bit like rerouting traffic when a bridge is out. The brain says move, and the system says, got it. Let's find another way. Researchers are also exploring the reverse, feeding information into the brain. Sensory prosthetics, such as artificial retinasal cochlear implants, already do this to some extent. These devices capture visual or auditory data and convert it into electrical signals that the brain can interpret. The results vary, but many people, with cochlear implants for example, are able to hear well enough to understand speech, music, and environmental sounds. A true marvel of neuroengineering. In the visual realm, efforts are underway to develop retinal implants and even direct stimulation of the visual cortex to restore sight. It's early days, but the idea of restoring vision, even partially to those who are blind, is no longer just a dream. And some researchers are asking, if we can restore basic vision, could we eventually create entirely new kinds of perception, infrared sight, ultraviolet awareness, or even sensory input from remote environments? The nervous system may not be limited to its factory settings forever. Another groundbreaking area is neuroprosthetics. Artificial limbs or devices that interface with the nervous system to restore movement and sensation. These are not just robotic. Limbs controlled by external buttons or switches. The most advanced versions connect to nerves or muscles directly, allowing users to move them using natural signals, and in some cases even feel touch or pressure. This feedback loop, movement, and sensation is key to making a prosthetic feel like a part of the body rather than a tool. Some new prosthetic scan transmit sensory information back into the peripheral nerves, tricking the brain into believing the sensation is coming from a real hand or foot. It's not quite indistinguishable from the original, but it's close enough. To change lives. In clinical neuroscience, there's also growing interest in using electrical stimulation to treat conditions like Parkinson's disease, depression, and epilepsy. Deep brain stimulation, where electrodes are implanted into specific brain regions, has helped thousands of people with Parkinson's reduce tremors and improve mobility. The technique delivers targeted pulses of electricity to regulate abnormal neural activity, like tuning a radio to a clearer signal. More recently, researchers have been experimenting with non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation. These approaches use magnets or small electrical currents on the scalp to modulate brain activity. They've shown promise in treating depression, anxiety, and even boosting cognitive performance in some cases, though the effects can vary and are still being carefully studied. Meanwhile, neurogenetics and stem cell therapy are opening doors that seemed sealed shut just a decade ago. By understanding the genetic basis of certain neurological conditions, scientists are exploring gene therapies that can fix faulty instructions at the source, and stem cells capable of becoming many different types of cells are being studied for their potential to replace damaged neurons, regenerate spinal cord tissue, or protect against neurodegeneration. There's even research into synthetic synapses, lab-made connections that mimic the properties of real ones. These could one day be used to repair or enhance neural circuits, or even to create hybrid brain-machine systems. It's still very theoretical, but it raises interesting questions about where biology ends and technology begins. On the horizon, we may also see more integration of neuroscience with artificial intelligence. AI can help decode complex brain activity, recognize patterns, and even adapt to a user's neural signals in real time. This could make BCIs faster, more intuitive, and more useful for everyday tasks. Think of a system that learns your mental rhythms and adjusts its behavior to suit your intent, sort of like having a highly empathetic co-pilot in your own mind. Of course, all this innovation comes with important ethical considerations. How much control should we have over brain activity? What does privacy look like when thoughts can be decoded by machines? How do we make these technologies safe, accessible, and respectful of individual autonomy? These are questions scientists, ethicists, and society at large are beginning to wrestle with, not because we're already living in a world of mind-reading helmets, but because we're getting closer than most people realize. It's worth noting that not all future breakthroughs have to be high-tech. Some of the most powerful interventions may continue to be low-tech. High-impact practices like mindfulness, sleep hygiene, exercise, and connection with others, all of which promote neuroplasticity and support mental health. The future of the nervous system isn't just about replacing what's lost, it's also about nourishing what's already there. And even with all the gadgets, implants, and interfaces on the horizon, one truth remains beautifully unchanged. The human brain is already an incredible system. It grows, adapts, learns, dreams, and loves all through soft tissue and electrical whispers. The technologies we develop will likely never replicate its full complexity, but they might help us heal it, support it, or communicate with it in ways we couldn't before. Imagine a future where a person with paralysis can type just by thinking, where a blind person can navigate a room through a synthetic visual signal, where depression is treated not just with medication, but with personalized neural feedback, where aging brains are gently supported to retain memory and clarity longer. That future is not light years away. In many labs and clinics, it's already being built. So while the nervous system may be quiet, its future is anything but. It hums with promise of healing, of enhancement, of new ways to connect, whether through biology, technology, or some elegant fusion of the two. We're just beginning to understand how to support this extraordinary network. And who knows, one day a thought alone might be all it takes to shape the world around us. As we come to the end of our quiet journey through the nervous system, take a moment to sit with the wonder of it all. Within you is a vast pulsing network, a symphony of cells, signals, and silent messages working tirelessly to carry your thoughts, shape your feelings, and move your body through the world. It does this without asking for praise or applause, without needing your conscious attention. The nervous system is your body's most devoted communicator, soft-spoken, incredibly precise, and always on call. From the spark of a single neuron to the vast loops of emotion, memory, sensation, and sleep, every part of you is connected by this gentle electrical whisper. It holds your stories, your dreams, your reflexes, and your quiet moments of awe. It carries you through joy, through grief, through the ordinary rhythm of daily life, and somehow it still finds time to let you laugh at a bad pun, jump at a surprise sneeze, or remember the smell of your grandmother's kitchen. All of this, every blink, breath, and bittersweet memory is made possible by your nervous system quietly humming along in the background. So, as you settle in for sleep, give a little gratitude to your inner circuitry. It has worked hard today, and tonight it will keep watch while you rest, replaying your memories, cleaning house, restoring balance, and preparing you for whatever tomorrow brings. If you enjoy this gentle exploration of the brain's quiet magic, I'd be ever so grateful if you left a like or subscribe to The Sleepy Scientist. It helps more curious minds find their way here. And before you drift off, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you're right now? Sleep well, and may your neurons fire softly until morning. Good night.